Eritrea, including against the ancient Orthodox Church of Eritrea. The legitimate patriarch Abuna Antonius has been under house arrest since 2007, and this month the government selected a patriarch against the canonical rules of the church. We also have many prisoners of faith, some in prison since 2004. The rape and deliberate starvation of civilians in the war in Tigray is alarming. Eritrean National Service recruits, including underage children, are being drafted into the war in Tigray, where casualties are said to be high. At the start of the war, 100,000 Eritrean refugees were in Tigray, and they have suffered immensely. Camps have been burned and refugees have been attacked. Many are still missing. Despite calls for withdrawal of Eritrean troops and for immediate cessation of hostilities, neither the government of Eritrea or Ethiopia seem to be adhering to this. We call on all international bodies to use their good offices to bring this war to an end. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Human Rights Watch.
We welcome the report of the Special Rapporteur and share his assessment that there have been no tangible improvements in the dire rights situation in Eritrea, including against the benchmarks which the Council had requested. The government has continued to subject its population to widespread forced labour and conscription, imposing restrictions on freedom of expression, opinion and faith, and restricting independent scrutiny by international monitors. Despite the recent release of a number of people detained purely for their religious beliefs, individuals continue to be held incommunicado and detained indefinitely, denied basic due process rights without access to legal counsel, judicial review or family visits, some for decades. We appreciate the rapporteur drawing attention to grave violations of international humanitarian law committed by Eritrean troops in a conflict in Tigray, Ethiopia. Our own research shows that Eritrean forces massacred scores of civilians, including children, in the historic town of Axum in late November 2020. Eritrean forces have also committed horrific acts of sexual violence against women and girls, detained and beat displaced persons, pillaged property, including livestock and harvests, burned crops and destroyed or damaged other key civilian infrastructure, including hospitals. Unfortunately, Eritrea's membership of the Human Rights Council has not led to greater respect for international standards or engagement with the Council's procedures. Therefore, we call on the Human Rights Council to adopt a resolution extending the mandate of the Special Rapporteur and calling on Eritrea to cooperate with that mandate. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Civicus.
Thank you, Madam President. Civicus and the Eritrean Movement for Democracy and Human Rights welcome the Special Rapporteur's report and engagement with the mandate. Eritrea's government remains one of the world's most repressive. It has no independent civil society organizations, media outlets, imposing severe restrictions on freedom of expression and opinion, peaceful assembly, association, and religion or belief. Eritrean forces have also been implicated in violations in the Tigray region of Ethiopia. Both the High Commissioner and Special Rapporteur report a lack of progress, and still the government remains unwilling to address grave violations and abuses. This is particularly concerning given that Eritrea is a member of this council. Human rights violations in Eritrea continue unabated, including arrests, incommunicado detention, and enforced disappearances. The indefinite national service continues and involves torture and forced labor. In late 2020, Eritrean forces indiscriminately attacked civilians in Axum, in the Tigray region, killing and injuring many, and destroyed property, including healthcare facilities. We call for an immediate independent investigation. We urge the Council to adopt a resolution renewing the mandate of the Special Rapporteur and a mandate reporting on the role played by Eritrean forces in Ethiopia's Tigray region since November 2020. We ask the Special Rapporteur, in the continued absence of engagement by Eritrea, what other avenues for international pressure could be leveraged to engender progress? Thank you.
Thank you. And this was the last speaker on the list. I will now give the floor to Mr. Babikar for his concluding remarks. You have 13 minutes and you will be speaking on Zoom. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. And I take this opportunity to thank all member states and civil society organizations for posing the questions. Regarding the first question by the EU posed yesterday related to how can the international community best assist me in monitoring the human rights situation in Eritrea, and how the plight of refugees could be alleviated. Actually, I would like to say that it is important to encourage civil society organizations in the diaspora to engage with the mandate, because actually diaspora have access to Eritrean refugees in the region. I also ask member states and invite them to visit, to actually facilitate my mandate in the region, specifically in host countries. Also, I mentioned that civil society organizations globally actually took some cases with regard to supporting the mandate in terms of litigation. For example, in the UK, as I outlined in my report, in Netherlands and in Sweden. Also, countries can also play a very good role in terms of adopting best practices and laws related to integration of refugees in host societies, including protection issues, including naturalization of refugees, including freedom of movement, especially there are some countries actually have their encampment policies. And I hope member states will help in this situation. And actually this will mitigate refugees being exposed to networks of human trafficking in the region. In terms of the situation of refugees in the I believe that support could be given humanitarian assistance in the region. I also urge the international community to use every tool at their disposal to engage Eritrea in improving its own human rights records, especially also resolving the current conflict in Tigray. A question from Australia related to what kind of why the rates of arbitrary detention are not declining despite the positive trends in prisoners' release. There is no actually any, or it is difficult to ascertain the exact rates of arbitrary detention due to lack of official data. What we know is that Eritrean authorities have continued to detain people in an arbitrary manner without any due process of law, as I outlined in my report, without any legal process. And there is a complete lack of rule of law and any due process, as actually this was also stated in many questions about the rule of law situation in the country. And also I agree that with the view mentioned by Germany, it is not acceptable in the 21st century that people detained without charge without being brought before a judge or being informed of the reasons for their arrest. And I think this situation has to be really tackled by the council about the prolonged detention of political opponents. A question by Switzerland related to what actually concrete measures needed to establish rule of law and create a safe environment for members of political oppositions. It is important, for example, to Eritrea to put stop to its policy of arbitrary detention and to release all political detainees. And appropriate measures should also be in place to ensure that human rights norms and standards are actually enforced. The judiciary also need to be rebuilt, need to be strengthened. And also civil society must have a space. They should actually have the right to organize, to speak, freedom of thought and religion, as it is important to respect freedom of thought and religion. Recently, actually, I received information regarding the closure of schools run by, for example, in Afar region by the Muslim schools there and Catholic faith schools as well. So this should actually stop the persecution of faith people face should actually stop. Eritrea also has never enforced its constitution. There is no separation of powers, no actually lack of a legislative body, lack of independent and functioning judiciary. And then there is a real institutional reform has to be done in this respect before actually having like capacity building for the country, because a real institutional reform has to be done so that rule of law is actually respected. There is a question actually related to Ethiopia and Eritrean, how can, from the Netherlands, regarding Eritrean refugees and how they're affected by the Tigray conflict, and what could actually should be done. The Tigray issue is outlined in this report, and it is of paramount importance. States should actually call on Ethiopia to protect refugees as part of its international obligation in the Tigray region, and to ensure prompt access to humanitarian agencies. And also the whereabouts of the refugees of hundreds remain actually missing is really a great concern. Yesterday, I'm really happy what was said by the Ethiopian ambassador about that now Ethiopia started to investigate these violations. This is very welcomed. I sent a letter. I engaged with the Ethiopian government on January, a letter of allegation about the situation of the Eritrean refugees, but I never received a response. But actually, I welcome now the Ethiopian position regarding establishing an investigation regarding the violations committed in Eritrea. And I urge also Eritrea to clarify the situation. Eritrea provided a written response. I had the chance to read it yesterday, but there is no any confirmation about any mentioning about whether the Eritrean are actually present in Tigray. The report actually mainly is focusing on the TPLF as the historical enemy, without actually saying anything about the actual presence of the Eritrean forces, and also the commission of violations and the allegation made in my report. So I hope that Eritrea will clarify that. There's the question from the US regarding is there any measures taken to investigate human rights abuse or allegations of violation of international humanitarian law, and forces to hold them accountable? With regard to this question, Eritrea, I have not received any information suggesting that the government of Eritrea has taken any measures to end the prevailing impunity for human rights and humanitarian law violations. In fact, Eritrea continues to flatly deny all these allegations, as mentioned in its report. Also, the question from Ireland related to how can to ensure accountability directly and indirectly for human rights violations, and the question also from the UK about this, what actually the strategic, how can strategic partners do to encourage to comply fully with the human rights situation. Actually, I'd like to say that for these questions, there are a number of ways states can support accountability for human rights violations. One is actually to continue to exert a level of pressure and through individual sanctions and also on institutions and individuals. I also call for investigation. I put it in my report for independent international through international mechanism. And this is really important especially for the Tigray region, because investigation should be done independently because of the nature of the crimes. There are issues related to, there must be also continuous engagement, constructive engagement asking the government of Eritrea to engage with the UN Human Rights Mechanism and also the African Commission on Human and People Rights. And I need to mention here, Eritrea mentioned in his report that they are actually engaging with the African Commission on Human and People Rights, but actually many decisions were taken by the Commission, and Eritrea did not actually even implement a single decision about many cases related to faith groups, related to political detainees. And I think Eritrea should respect decisions by the African Commission, especially it is an African country and has to be bound by decisions taken by regional human rights mechanisms. Related to the issues raised by China, saying that this is not outside my mandate. I would like to note that first of all, China says the report is not objective. Also, this is mentioned by other countries like Sri Lanka, Cuba, Venezuela, Belarus, Nicaragua, all these countries, Armenia, mentioned that the report is not objective. Actually, this report is absolutely objective. I'm also really concerned about it is important for Eritrea to engage. The report is objective also in terms of that I assess all the information. I explore all my sources. I interview people. I reach out to different civil society organizations, to families. So the report is absolutely objective and absolutely independent. I also would like to mention that this report is actually within the mandate because the violations committed by Eritrea and the Tigray, it is committed extraterritorially. And actually, according to the information they have, Eritrea has an effective control over the Tigray region and all the violations committed, especially in the two camps, Hitsas and Shemelba. It has actual presence from all information I got, confirmed that they're actually present and committing the violations. And in this case, human rights violations, if you have a control over certain area, substantively, human rights law applies, as well as international humanitarian law. So the obligations, I believe, of Eritrean government extends where it has actually effective control over a specific area. And all information indicates that Eritrea has effective presence in Tigray. And actually I have received a lot of credible sources on that. There's also another issue raised by Somalia yesterday about the Somali forces present trained in Eritrea and actually trained in Eritrea and involved in the conflict in Tigray. I need to respond that I have received information from multiple and credible sources. I spoke also to my own sources regarding the participation of young soldiers who has been actually sent to Eritrea for training. And actually I welcome the announcement made by the Somali Prime Minister to actually, after the report, apparently, and also after the pressure from families, asking about their loved ones, to establish a high-level government commission of inquiry to investigate the complaints raised by parents about how these trainees were actually disappeared. I also take this opportunity to express my willingness to cooperate with the Somali authorities on matters within the purview of my mandate, including the allegation of an abuse and also the mistreatment of Somali trainees by Eritrean authorities. I hope that I managed to respond to most of the questions. And finally, I would like to extend my my hands to the Eritrean government to engage constructively. I have sent many letters. I have sent actually a letter to Eritrea to asking them to engage constructively with my mandate. And I hope that the Eritrea will be willing to cooperate with my mandate in order to improve the human rights situation for the Eritrean people. Thank you.
Thank you. This brings us to the end of this interactive dialogue. I wish to thank Mr. Babikar for his participation today. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we will now proceed with the interactive dialogue on the annual report of the High Commissioner presented yesterday morning. The list of speakers will close in 15 minutes. I now invite interested delegations to ask questions to the High Commissioner and to make comments on her report. And I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Costa Rica on behalf of a group of countries by video statement.
Thank you, Madam President. I make this intervention on behalf of 56 countries. The full list is available on the extranet. We share the High Commissioner's concerns on Nicaragua, including persistent impunity for human rights violations since April 2018 and continued reports of arbitrary detentions. The government must ensure the protection of human rights and bring to account those responsible. We urge the government to cease harassment of journalists and human rights defenders and to allow civil society organizations to operate in safe and enabling environments without fear of reprisals. We're troubled by the government's failure to implement meaningful electoral reforms by the Organization of American States' May 2021 deadline, backed by this Council in March. We're deeply concerned that recently enacted laws unduly restrict political participation, freedom of expression, peaceful assembly and association. The arbitrary dissolution of political parties and the criminal proceedings against multiple presidential contenders and descendants are especially worrisome. We call for their immediate release. The measures are likely to impede the holding of free and fair elections in Nicaragua this November. We urge Nicaragua to engage with the international community to avail itself of technical assistance to allow international election observers and to reestablish dialogue and renew trust and democracy. Nicaraguans deserve free and fair elections through a transparent and credible process and a peaceful solution to the country's socio-political crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Cameroon on behalf of the group of African states.
Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente. Le groupe africain prend note du rapport présenté et salue la démarche choisie par Madame Bachelet de privilégier le dialogue de coopération en vue de parvenir à des partenariats féconds pour la protection et la promotion des droits de l'homme. Nous prenons note aussi de l'attention portée à la situation des droits de l'homme dans certains pays de notre région et réitérons l'attachement à une approche constructive et concertée afin de trouver des solutions à ces problèmes de droits de l'homme et d'aider ces pays à renforcer leur capacité à promouvoir et protéger les droits de l'homme. Le groupe africain encourage Mme Bachelet à continuer à prêter l'autorité conférée pour son mandat pour également accorder une attention particulière aux questions suivantes. Le droit d'accès de tous aux vaccins contre la COVID, la recherche d'une solution équitable et durable à la crise de la dette et des questions connexes conformément aux engagements politiques de la communauté internationale et du respect des obligations, le suivi et l'efficience des questions liées au racisme dans leur ensemble et en particulier dans le cadre de la résolution 43.1 portant la promotion, la protection des droits de l'homme, des libertés fondamentales des Africains, des personnes ascendant africains, contre le retour excessif à la force et aux autres violations des droits de l'homme. De ce qui précède, il en résulte que le groupe africain souligne la nécessité de l'augmentation du budget du Haut Commissariat en vue de la mise en œuvre du mandat qui lui a été confié par la résolution 48/141 de l'Assemblée générale des Nations unies. Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente.
I thank you. I now give the floor to Norway on behalf of a group of countries by video statement.
Thank you, Madam President. It is clear from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Human Rights Treaties and other core UN documents that only democratic forms of governance are capable of providing an environment conducive to long-term peace and security, sustainable development and the full enjoyment of human rights. Yet today, many of the fundamental pillars of democracy are being openly challenged, including by states that are party to the aforementioned treaties. In view of these challenges, we believe it is time for the world's democracies to reaffirm their common conviction that the authority and legitimacy of government stems from the will of the people, as expressed through the periodic and genuine elections based on universal and equal suffrage and secret ballot, and that all citizens have the right to take part in the government of their country by standing for election or by freely voting for their chosen representatives. That everyone has the right to freedom of opinion, expression, peaceful assembly and association, that everyone is entitled to a fair and public hearing by a competent, independent and impartial tribunal, and that everyone is entitled to all human rights, civil and political, economic, social and cultural, without distinction. The United Nations, including this Council and its mechanisms, has a critical role to play in promoting, defending and reinvigorating democracy, to help deliver on the hopes and aspirations of the people the UN ultimately serves. Thank you.
Thank you, and I give the floor to the Netherlands on behalf of a group of countries by video statement.
I deliver this statement on behalf of the Benelux, Belgium, Luxembourg and my own country, the Netherlands. Madam President, we confirm our principled position as expressed in previous statements and condemn all forms of intimidation and reprisals against civil society actors who engage with human rights mechanisms. The effective functioning of the UN human rights system relies largely on the meaningful engagement with civil society actors. We therefore call upon all states to take all necessary measures to end, prevent, investigate and ensure accountability for acts of intimidation or reprisal, and to report back to the Council on action taken, for example during relevant interactive dialogues. We praise the efforts of the Office of the High Commissioner in addressing reprisals, as well as the important work of Assistant Secretary General Ms. Brans-Keerts. We stress the importance of clear UN protocols on how to respond to reprisals. We urge the UN to make sufficient resources available. Finally, more action is needed to address reprisals in situations where civil society faces systemic repression. We urge the special procedures to gather information on reprisal cases during country visits and to take preliminary measures to prevent reprisals afterwards. We thank the International Service for Human Rights for the studies, analysis and recommendations in this topic. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Egypt on behalf of the group of Arab states by video statement.
السيدة الرئيسة تشكر المجموعة العربية المفوضة السامية على استعراضها لتقريرها السنوي والذي يعكس حجم وتعدد أنشطة المفوضية رغم استمرار القيود التي تفرضها الجائحة. تعيد المجموعة التأكيد على أن تعزيز وحماية حقوق الإنسان للجميع دون تمييز من أي نوع مسؤولية أساسية تقع على عاتق كل دولة دون استثناء، بما يستدعي إدانة كافة الانتهاكات في أي مكان بالعالم. وتعرب المجموعة عن رفضها لأي ممارسات من شأنها أن تحيد بمجلس حقوق الإنسان عن مسؤوليته في تعزيز وحماية حقوق الإنسان بطريقة منصفة وعادلة، وتشدد على ضرورة التزام المجلس ومختلف آلياته بمبادئ العالمية والحيادية والموضوعية والابتعاد عن الانتقائية والتسييس حفاظا على مصداقيته. ومن ثم تؤكد المجموعة العربية على موقفها الثابت بأهمية تناول أوضاع حقوق الإنسان في جميع الدول على قدم المساواة، ورفضها لاستمرار النهج غير البناء القائم على استهداف دول بعينها بشكل انتقائي يعكس ازدواجية المعايير سواء تحت البند الرابع أو أي من بنود المجلس، وبصورة تتنافى مع الأهداف الرئيسية التي أنشئ من أجلها ومع أساليب عمله المتفق عليها. كما ندعو الدول الأعضاء ومكتب المفوضية وحملة الولايات إلى تناول قضايا حقوق الإنسان في إطار من الحيادية والتعاون البناء، ولتعزيز التشاور مع الدول المعنية وإعطاء الاهتمام الكافي بالحقوق الاقتصادية والاجتماعية والثقافية، بما في ذلك الحق في التنمية إلى جانب الحقوق المدنية والسياسية.
I thank you. I now give the floor to Uruguay on behalf of a group of countries by video statement.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta. Tengo el honor de realizar esta intervención en nombre de Argentina, Brasil, Chile, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Guatemala, Honduras, México, Panamá, Paraguay, Perú y mi país, Uruguay. Saludamos a la alta comisionada y le agradecemos la presentación de su informe anual, que es reflejo de las diversas actividades que lleva a cabo su oficina en cumplimiento de su mandato de promoción y protección de los derechos humanos en todo el mundo. Reconocemos en particular el asesoramiento técnico ofrecido a los estados en favor de la inclusión de un enfoque de derechos humanos en las políticas de respuesta y recuperación de la pandemia. Al mismo tiempo, saludamos sus esfuerzos en materia de promoción de la cobertura sanitaria universal y la protección social universal como elementos principales del nuevo contrato social alentado por el secretario general. Encomiamos la asistencia técnica proporcionada en áreas tan diversas como los derechos humanos de los migrantes, la lucha contra el racismo, la igualdad de género, los derechos humanos en conexión con el medio ambiente y la protección del espacio cívico y de los defensores de derechos humanos. Manifestamos también nuestro respaldo al trabajo en favor de la integración de componentes de derechos humanos en todas las misiones de paz. Por último, al tiempo de reconocer el apoyo que brinda la Oficina a los órganos de tratados y procedimientos especiales, agradeceríamos que nos otorgue mayor información sobre las limitaciones de recursos financieros y humanos que enfrentan este ámbito. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the European Union on Zoom.
Thank you, Madam President. The European Union is deeply concerned about human rights in Russia and silencing of critical voices, such as the sentencing of Alexei Navalny. In Belarus, the systemic repression of civil society continues. There should be no impunity for human rights violations. We call on China to respect human rights, particularly in Xinjiang and in Tibet, and allow meaningful access to Xinjiang, including for the High Commissioner. We urge China to uphold its international commitments, including with respect to Hong Kong. Nicaragua must end the crackdown and restore inclusive dialogue. We are concerned about human rights violations and abuses in Cameroon. In Tigray, we call for the end to all violence, the withdrawal of Eritrean troops, and full, safe, and unfettered humanitarian access. We hope the Council will discuss the findings of the joint investigation. In Myanmar, we call for the restoration of democracy and the rule of law, the implementation of ASEAN's 5-point consensus, as well as for accountability. We urge Lebanon to deliver on the accountability for the Beirut port explosion. In Saudi Arabia, we are concerned about the application of the death penalty. We are also concerned about the deterioration of respect for the rule of law and human rights in Turkey. We urge Turkey to implement the judgments of the European Court of Human Rights and to uphold women's rights. Thank you.
Thank you. I now give the floor to the Netherlands on behalf of a group of countries.
I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of 28 countries. Madam President, we wish to acknowledge the efforts of the Iraqi government to improve the protection of human rights, which is essential for stability and prosperity, and we stand ready to continue to assist. We commend the Iraqi government for its decision to hold very important early elections in a few months after peaceful demonstrations of young Iraqis in 2019. These protests unfortunately escalated into violence and led to at least 487 demonstrators being killed. Iraq committed to hold perpetrators to account, and we commend Prime Minister Kadhimi for his engagement. We acknowledge the complex environment with armed actors operating outside of state control, but progress has been limited so far. We urge Iraq to further intensify its current efforts for accountability. We're very concerned about increased intimidation and attacks against protesters, human rights defenders, journalists, and electoral candidates. The rights of peaceful assembly, freedom of association, freedom of expression, and media freedom are essential for the protection of human rights. The government of Iraq needs to enhance efforts to create a safe public environment. We also encourage OHCHR and UNAMI to further strengthen a human rights-based approach and to provide assistance to fulfill Iraq's international obligations to respect fundamental freedoms, such as the right of freedom of expression and peaceful assembly for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the United Kingdom on behalf of a group of countries by video statement.
This statement is by the Core Group on Sri Lanka. Council Resolution 46/1 called upon Sri Lanka to address the harmful legacies of war and to protect human rights, including for those from religious minorities. We regret the lack of progress on these issues with further concerning developments. The Sri Lankan government has attempted to dismiss a number of emblematic cases and initiate criminal proceedings against individuals pursuing these cases. This counters the Council's call for prompt, thorough and impartial investigations. We call for former CID Director Shani Abiyaskara's safety to be ensured. We are deeply concerned about the ongoing use of the Prevention of Terrorism Act and the intention to introduce a rehabilitation process lacking adequate judicial oversight. Human rights lawyer Hijaz Hizbullah and poet and teacher Anaf Jazim remain detained without trial, and arrests have continued, including among minority communities and the political opposition. We remain concerned about the restrictions on memorialisation. We join the Bar Association of Sri Lanka in requesting independent and impartial investigations into recent deaths in police custody. We are concerned over appointments to the Office on Missing Persons and reiterate the importance of ensuring independent and credible institutions to achieve justice. We encourage Sri Lanka to cooperate with the Council and the OHCHR in relation to Resolution 46/1 and stand ready to support this.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to China on behalf of a group of countries by video statement.
Madam President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of a group of countries. The full text will be uploaded to the extranet. We are gravely concerned about the baseless accusations by certain countries using human rights as a means to interfere in the internal affairs of others, while turning a blind eye to their own serious human rights problems. Apparently, they want to impose their own values and models by using human rights as an excuse for military intervention and unilateral coercive measures, thus severely violating the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter. It is important to adhere to the principles of sovereign equality, practice true multilateralism, and work together to promote international cooperation on human rights and uphold international justice. We also hope that the High Commissioner and the OHCHR will carry their duties in accordance with General Assembly Resolution 48/141 and within the framework of the UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, respecting the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of states. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Haiti on behalf of a group of countries by video statement.
Madame la Présidente, c'est un honneur pour moi de prononcer cette déclaration au nom du groupe de 32 États qui soutiennent la souveraineté pleine et entière du Maroc sur ses provinces sahariennes et qui se félicitent de l'ouverture par de nombreux pays de consulats généraux dans les villes de Dakhla et Laayoune, constituant un levier de renforcement de la coopération économique et des investissements au profit des populations locales, du développement régional et aussi continental. La question du Sahara est un différend politique traité par le Conseil de sécurité qui reconnaît la prééminence de l'initiative d'autonomie présentée par le Maroc comme crédible et sérieuse. Le Maroc s'est engagé depuis de nombreuses années dans une interaction constructive, volontaire et profonde avec le système des droits de l'homme des Nations Unies, en particulier le bureau de la haut-commissaire aux droits de l'homme pour la promotion et le respect des droits de l'homme sur l'ensemble de son territoire. Dans ses résolutions sur le différend du Sahara, le Conseil de sécurité se félicite du rôle joué par les commissions nationales et régionales des droits de l'homme à Dakhla et Laayoune et de l'interaction entre le Maroc et les mécanismes relevant des procédures spéciales du Conseil des droits de l'homme de l'Organisation des Nations Unies. Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Timor-Leste on behalf of a group of countries in person.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to deliver the statement on behalf of the cross-regional group of states. The resumed armed conflict in the non-self-governing territory of Western Sahara following the breach of the ceasefire by the Kingdom of Morocco on 30 November 2020 is the source of additional widespread and serious violation of human rights and breaches of international humanitarian rules in the illegal occupied territory. We express our dismay that the High Commissioner does not seem to be concerned about the high number of civilian Sahrawi, notable human rights defenders and independent journalists being victims of the tight surveillance, harassment, arbitrary arrest and arbitrary detention, rape and torture following the resuming of the conflict. We wish to stress that the Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, being sized in recent times by a number of complaints, notes that there is a widespread practice of abuse against persons who advocate for the right to self-determination of the people of Western Sahara. Finally, we condemn the persistent violence of the Sahrawi people's permanent sovereignty over their natural resources by Morocco and international companies that are plundering those resources. Madam President, once more, we urge the High Commissioner for Human Rights to dispatch urgently an observation mission to the occupied Western Sahara and to report on the human rights situation to the Human Rights Council at each 48th session. We also urge you to resume the technical mission to Western Sahara that was last on the ground in 2015. We call on the United Nations to extend the MINURSO mandate to include a human rights monitoring mechanism. In conclusion, Madam President, we remain committed to ensuring that the Sahrawi people are enabled to exercise their inalienable right to self-determination in conformity with all relevant UN resolutions, including Resolution 1514. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. I now give the floor to China on behalf of a group of countries for a video statement.
Madam President, I have the honor to speak on behalf of a group of countries. The full text of the statement will be uploaded to the extranet. Peace, development, equity, justice, democracy, and freedom represent the shared values of humanity and common goals that all countries strive for. Diversity is what defines our world, and diversified forms of democracy are practiced in various countries. The key judgment is whether it fits the particular situation in a country, whether it represents the will of its people, and whether it safeguards people's interests and enjoys their support, as true democracy brings about political stability, social progress, and well-being for the people, and contributes to the promotion and protection of human rights. To impose, under the pretext of democracy, one's own social system and model of democracy on others, interfere in other countries' internal affairs, and impose unilateral coercive measures are the very opposite of democracy and humanity. States should practice true multilateralism, enhance consultations and cooperation, advance peace and development, and promote and protect human rights, rather than drawing lines between ideologies or creating division and confrontation. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. And I give the floor to the Russian Federation on behalf of a group of countries by video statement.
Madam President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of a number of like-minded countries. We regret to note recently increased practices by the OHCHR and HRC special mandate holders to interpret themselves the provisions of the intergovernmental decisions and to use the abusive and disrespectful language in its public statements and news releases. Such tendencies are extremely worrying as they not only go against the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, violate the existing UN rules and regulations, as provided, for example, by the HRC IB package and relevant GA resolutions, establishing the mandate of the HCHR, but also undermine the impartiality and credibility of the whole UN human rights machinery. We do not consider legal or acceptable the High Commissioner's attempts to give new meaning or fine-tune the scope of the mandated activities entrusted to her by the HRC decisions. Calling ordinary appointment procedure of the experts by fact-finding mission goes far beyond the HC credentials. Therefore, we call on the HC to strictly follow the letter of the intergovernmental decisions in her activities. We would also like to request the HC and OHCHR, which act as the UN Secretariat, servicing the HRC and its subsidiary bodies, to provide the HRC special mandate holders with additional advanced courses and training on the UN staff rules and regulations and the IB package, in particular the Code of Conduct of mandate holders, in order to instill them a proper knowledge of the existing rules and behavior, including in the field of language norms accepted in the UN. I thank you.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Belarus on behalf of a group of countries by video statement.
I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of 64 countries. Respect for sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of states and non-interference in internal affairs of sovereign states represent basic norms governing international relations. Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and Tibet-related issues are China's internal affairs and brook no interference by any external forces. We support China's implementation of one country, two systems in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. We maintain that all parties should abide by the purposes and principles of the Charter of the United Nations and the principles of universality, impartiality, objectivity, and non-selectivity, respect the right of the people of each state to choose independently the path for human rights development in accordance with their national conditions, and treat all human rights with the same emphasis. We call upon all states to uphold multilateralism, solidarity and collaboration, and to promote and protect human rights through constructive dialogue and cooperation. We oppose politicization of human rights and double standards. We also oppose unfounded allegations against China out of political motivation and based on disinformation, and interference in China's internal affairs under the pretext of human rights.
Thank you. I give the floor to China on behalf of a group of countries by video statement.
Madam President, I'm speaking on behalf of a group of countries. We are deeply concerned about the serious human rights violations against the indigenous people in Canada. Historically, Canada robbed the indigenous people of their land, killed them, and eradicated their culture. The entire world was shocked to learn recent discovery of the remains of over 200 indigenous children at a Canadian boarding school. Between the 1830s and 1990s, over 150,000 indigenous children in Canada were reported to have been forcibly taken away from their parents. At least 4,000 children died of disease, neglect, accidents, or abuse while at school. We call for a thorough and impartial investigation into all cases where crimes were committed against the indigenous people, especially the children. We are deeply concerned about discrimination against migrants in Canada and inhumane treatment of them in Canadian detention centres. We are also deeply concerned over the illegal killings of civilians by Canadian overseas military servicemen and systemic racial discrimination, xenophobia, Islamophobia within Canada. We urge Canada to immediately stop violations of human rights and call on the Human Rights Council, the OHCHR, and relevant special procedures to keep following the human rights issues in Canada. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. And I give the floor to Canada on behalf of a group of countries by video.
Madam High Commissioner, I have the honor of delivering this cross-regional joint statement on behalf of over 40 countries. We are gravely concerned about the human rights situation in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. Credible reports indicate that over 1 million people have been arbitrarily detained in Xinjiang and that there's widespread surveillance disproportionately targeting Uyghurs and members of other minorities and restrictions on fundamental freedoms in Uyghur culture. There are also reports of torture or cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment or punishment, forced sterilization, sexual and gender-based violence, and forced separation of children from their parents by authorities. We also share the concerns expressed by UN Special Procedures in their March 29 statement on alleged detention, forced labor, and transfers of Uyghurs and members of other Muslim minorities, and in a letter published by UN experts describing collective repression of religious and ethnic minorities. We urge China to allow immediate, meaningful, and unfettered access to Xinjiang for independent observers, including the High Commissioner, and to urgently implement the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination's 8 recommendations related to Xinjiang, including by ending the arbitrary detention of Uyghurs and members of other Muslim minorities. Finally, we continue to be deeply concerned about the deterioration of fundamental freedoms in Hong Kong under the national security law, and about the human rights situation in Tibet. We call on Chinese authorities to abide by their human rights obligations. Thank you.
Thank you. And I give the floor to Qatar for a video statement.
نشكر المفوضة السامية على تقريرها السنوي ونشيد بالجهود التي اطلع بها مكتبها خلال الفترة المشمولة بالتقرير. كما نثمن قدرة المفوضية السامية على التكيف مع التحديات الدولية التي صاحبت انتشار جائحة كوفيد-19، ونأمل أن تواصل المفوضية الاستفادة من دروس الاستجابة لهذه الجائحة في تطوير خطتها المستقبلية وتعزيز قدرتها على إنجاز مهامها. كما نشارك المفوضة السامية رأيها بأهمية وضع أهداف التنمية المستدامة وجهود الانتعاش الاقتصادي القائم على حقوق الإنسان على رأس الأولويات في المرحلة المقبلة، لا سيما في الدول النامية. ونشير هنا إلى عزم دولة قطر استضافة مؤتمر الأمم المتحدة الخامس المعني بأقل البلدان نموا خلال الفترة من 23-27 يناير 2022، والذي نأمل أن يشكل فرصة لدعم قدرات هذه الدول وتعزيز صمودها لتحقيق خطة التنمية المستدامة وأهدافها الشاملة المتمثلة في عدم ترك أحد خلف الركب. أخيرا، واقتناعا بأهمية العمل الكبير الذي تطلع به المفوضية السامية والتحديات التي تواجهها بسبب استمرار جائحة كوفيد-19. فقد تعهدت دولة قطر بتقديم دعم للمفوضية للفترة من 2021 إلى 2023، وذلك من أجل تمكينها من الاطلاع بولايتها بفعالية. وشكرا سيدتي الرئيسة.
Thank you. I give the floor to Liechtenstein for a video statement.
Thank you, Madam President. Liechtenstein thanks the High Commissioner for Human Rights for the presentation of her comprehensive annual report. 2020 has certainly not been an easy year. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has, however, proven its flexibility and effectiveness by adapting to the difficult circumstances posed by the COVID-19 pandemic and the financial situation of the OHCHR. Especially in the current context, the promotion and protection of human rights is of utmost importance. The pandemic has exacerbated pre-existing inequalities and affected a broad range of human rights. Liechtenstein welcomes the OHCHR's tireless efforts in providing guidance for the states on how to apply a human rights-based approach in stopping the spread of the virus. In this regard, we also want to point out the important work of the special procedures. While Liechtenstein continues to be concerned about the financial situation of the OHCHR, we also would like to use this opportunity to reiterate our full support for the High Commissioner for Human Rights and her office. And I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Canada for a video statement.
Canada thanks the High Commissioner for her report. For this dialogue, we'd like to focus on Canada's own human rights situation. Recently, the remains of children were located near the former Kamloops Indian Residential School in British Columbia. What happened in Kamloops is neither an exception nor an isolated incident. Over decades, thousands of Indigenous children were taken and sent to residential schools where they suffered severe injustices and mistreatment. We acknowledge that Canada has historically denied the rights of Indigenous peoples through assimilationist policies and practices. As Prime Minister Trudeau recently stated, we also acknowledge that Indigenous peoples still face systemic racism, discrimination, and injustices. We know that the world expects Canada to adhere to international human rights standards. We too expect no less of ourselves. We remain steadfast in implementing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and addressing the issues identified in the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Calls for Justice. We are also committed to supporting survivors, their families, communities, and all those impacted by the legacy of residential schools. We continue to renew nation-to-nation relationships with Indigenous peoples based on the affirmation of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. Be it at home or abroad, we believe that reckoning with past human rights violations and abuses, engaging in meaningful dialogue, and working together as partners are foundational to creating more inclusive societies where all can fully enjoy their human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Cuba for a video statement.
Presidenta, tomamos nota de la información y la documentación presentada. Reafirmamos nuestra convicción de que en el trabajo de la Oficina de la Alta Comisionada deben primar la imparcialidad y la universalidad en el tratamiento de los derechos humanos, así como la lucha contra la politización y la selectividad, que debe ser una prioridad. Exhortamos a la oficina a mantener esfuerzos por contribuir al respeto, al enfoque equilibrado, a la objetividad, al diálogo y la cooperación en la maquinaria de derechos humanos. Apreciaríamos conocer cómo la oficina se dispone a implementar estos principios en su actividad cotidiana, tanto en su funcionamiento interno como en su proyección hacia el resto del sistema de Naciones Unidas y en su relación con los Estados. Reiteramos nuestra preocupación por la ejecución de acciones bajo la llamada Agenda de Prevención, muy susceptible de politización y selectividad, así como dependiente en buena medida de los intereses políticos de los Estados donantes. Señora Presidenta, reafirmamos el compromiso de Cuba con la promoción y protección de los derechos humanos y su firme voluntad de continuar trabajando en base al diálogo respetuoso y la cooperación con la Oficina de la Alta Comisionada y con los mecanismos de derechos humanos de aplicación universal y no discriminatoria. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Luxembourg on Zoom.
Madame la Présidente, le Luxembourg s'associe pleinement à la déclaration de l'Union européenne. Ma délégation remercie la haute commissaire pour son rapport et confirme son attachement sans faille au mandat et à l'indépendance de la haute commissaire et de son bureau. Nous félicitons la haute commissaire pour son approche transversale des défis globaux avec les droits humains en leur centre. Nous renouvelons à ce sujet notre très vif encouragement à tous les pays devant accueillir une visite ou une mission de suivi de coopérer pleinement et sans tarder avec les mécanismes de l'ONU. Nous réitérons ici l'importance que revêtirait une visite de la haute commissaire dans la région autonome du Xinjiang en Chine. Le Luxembourg reconnaît l'urgence de la protection de tous les droits en période de pandémie et salue l'importance donnée à leur indivisibilité. Les droits économiques, sociaux et culturels forment un ensemble indivisible avec les droits civils et politiques. Nous partageons les préoccupations exprimées également au sujet du recul démocratique et de l'espace civique dans de nombreux pays comme en Russie et au Cambodge. La lutte contre la pandémie ne doit pas être un prétexte pour saper les droits civils et politiques. En attendant le rapport de la mission conjointe au Tigré, ma délégation renouvelle son appel insistant au gouvernement d'Éthiopie et d'Érythrée de cesser les violations de droits humains et du droit international humanitaire, y inclut les actions visant à affamer les populations civiles. Je vous remercie de votre attention.
Thank you, and I give the floor to France on Zoom. France, you have the floor. We will return to France. Now give the floor to Germany for a video statement.
Madam President, Madam High Commissioner, Germany aligns with the EU and thanks the High Commissioner for her report and her office's tireless work. To support OHCHR, we have increased our voluntary contribution to $11.5 million, 50% unearmarked. Madam President, the treaty bodies have shown flexibility in 2020 by adopting virtual working methods. It is crucial to preserve the advantages of digital tools. Madam President, we remain deeply concerned about the human rights situation, including in Belarus, China, Myanmar, Syria, and occupied parts of Ukraine, which we will refer to separately. We reiterate our deep concerns about the human rights situation in Egypt, where human rights defenders continue to be harassed. In Ethiopia's Tigray region, grave and widespread human rights violations, including sexual and gender-based violence, are deeply worrisome. In Russia, those who dare to think and live differently than the government's ideology face repression and persecution, Alexei Navalny being only one of many. The people in illegally annexed Crimea and occupied part of eastern Ukraine have their freedom restricted by a foreign power. In Venezuela, people deserve that the country finally embarks on a credible path to a democratic future. In North Korea, the suffering of the people at the hands of a merciless regime continues. Thank you.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Kuwait for a video statement.
أخذ وفد بلادي علما بالتقرير السنوي الصادر عن مفوضية الأمم المتحدة السامية لحقوق الإنسان، وأننا نشكرها على ما جاء فيه من تحديات لحالة حقوق الإنسان حول العالم، لا سيما بعد انتشار وباء فيروس كورونا وتأثيره السلبي على جملة من هذه الحقوق. ورغم هذه التحديات أود أن أؤكد على تطلع بلادي للاستمرار في مد يد التعاون مع المفوضية السامية ولمكتبها بما يمكنهم من القيام بالولاية من نبيل المناطة بهما بأفضل السبل الممكنة حتى في ظل الصعوبات المتزايدة أمامها. سيدة الرئيسة، تؤكد دولة الكويت إيمانها العميق بشمولية حقوق الإنسان وترابطها، وتحبذ الحوار البناء بين كافة الدول من أجل تعزيز وصون حقوق الإنسان مبني على احترام حق المجتمعات في اختيار القيم والمبادئ والمنهج المناسب لشعوبها لحماية وتعزيز حقوق الإنسان. ولذلك فهي تؤكد على ضرورة احترام حق المجتمعات في اختيار القيم والمبادئ والمنهج المناسب لها لحماية وتعزيز حقوق الإنسان، وتدعو إلى التعاضد بين المجتمعات بدلا من محاولة بعض الأطراف فرض قيمهم وثقافتهم على الآخرين بحجة عالمية حقوق الإنسان، فلا يمكننا القبول بمبادئ تتعارض مع قيمنا وثقافاتنا. سيد الرئيس، أشار تقرير المفوضة السامية لتفاقم حالة العديد من المجتمعات الضعيفة بسبب تفشي وباء كورونا، لا سيما ارتفاع نسبة الحوادث التي تستهدف الأشخاص والناجمة عن التعصب والتمييز العرقي والديني، ونطالب بمعالجة هذا الموضوع. شكرا سيدة.
Thank you, and I now give the floor to Ecuador on Zoom.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Mi delegación agradece a la alta comisionada por su informe y reconoce la labor realizada por su oficina en el contexto de la pandemia. Mi país reitera que la distribución y acceso a las vacunas para el COVID-19 debe ser transparente, equitativo, universal y oportuno. Política crucial para una recuperación eficaz. Considera fundamental que la comunidad internacional refuerce la cooperación y se congratula por los esfuerzos en ese sentido, al tiempo de formular un llamado a la solidaridad de aquellos estados que pueden proveer vacunas en plazos adecuados. En relación con el espíritu de las intervenciones de las distintas delegaciones, el Ecuador reitera su adhesión irrestricta al principio del respeto y promoción de los derechos humanos, el cual debe ser integral para todo el espectro de los derechos económicos, sociales, culturales, civiles y políticos, colocando al ser humano en el centro de todos los esfuerzos. Finalmente, en cuanto al tema relativo a determinadas situaciones en la República Popular China, el Ecuador reafirma su estricto apego a los principios del derecho internacional, entre ellos el respeto a la soberanía de los estados y la no injerencia en asuntos internos, y reitera su reconocimiento al principio de una sola China. Fiel a esta posición de principios y a la vez con preocupación por la situación en el territorio autónomo de Hong Kong, aspira a que ésta sea superada mediante el diálogo en el marco de la ley. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Slovenia for a video statement.
Madam President, Madam High Commissioner, Slovenia aligns itself with the EU statement and would like to deliver the following remarks in its national capacity. We welcome your update on the recent developments in human rights situations around the globe. We call on all countries concerned to collaborate with the Office of the High Commissioner, including by allowing full and unfettered access to its territories. Slovenia remains committed to the Convention on Racial Discrimination. Work on elimination of racial discrimination should be part of our ongoing efforts to fight all forms of discrimination. Our delegation would therefore welcome your continuous engagement on this issue. We would like to use this opportunity to thank you and your office for all your work on sensitizing member states on the importance of developing a human rights response to COVID-19 and its recovery. Human rights should be guiding us in building back better. Slovenia has put human rights-based approach to the pandemic at the forefront of our action. At the same time, the pre-existing challenges persist, and it is our task to strengthen our efforts to protect persons in vulnerable situations. Allow us to mention two major steps that Slovenia has taken in its direction recently. Last month, the right to use and development of the Slovenian Sign Language, as well as the Hungarian and Italian sign languages in the areas with official language minority communities, have been enshrined in the Slovenian constitution. Furthermore, recent amendments to the Penal Code have redefined sexual consent in line with the concept that only yes means yes. Madam High Commissioner, Slovenia remains a strong supporter of the work you and your office do here in Geneva and on the grounds. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Switzerland by video statement.
Madame la Présidente, Madame la Haute-Commissaire, la Suisse est préoccupée par les restrictions grandissantes à l'égard des droits à la liberté d'expression, de réunion et d'association dans le monde, notamment les arrestations et condamnations de journalistes, de défenseuses et défenseurs des droits de l'homme et de blogueuses et blogueurs pour avoir pacifiquement mené leurs activités ou exprimé leurs opinions au Bangladesh, en Irak et en Iran. Les restrictions continues des libertés fondamentales en Russie, notamment la classification des organisations de la société civile comme extrémistes. L'usage excessif de la force lors des manifestations en Colombie, où la Suisse appelle tous les acteurs à la retenue et au dialogue. La répression des droits aux libertés d'expression et des réunions pacifiques à Hong Kong, ainsi que la nouvelle réforme électorale et la loi sur la sécurité nationale. Par ailleurs, la Suisse s'inquiète des allégations concernant l'usage excessif de la force dans la prison de Jao au Bahreïn. Elle appelle les autorités à mener des investigations en vertu de la Convention contre la torture. En Afghanistan, la situation sécuritaire est d'une instabilité croissante. La Suisse est particulièrement préoccupée par la situation des minorités, telles que la communauté d'Hazara, qui est la cible d'attentats. La Suisse appelle les autorités du Nicaragua à mettre fin à la répression des opposants et à s'engager à ce que les élections de novembre soient justes et libres. Enfin, la Suisse s'inquiète des hostilités persistantes dans le Tigray en Éthiopie. Elle appelle toutes les parties à respecter le droit international humanitaire et les droits de l'homme et à assurer l'accès humanitaire. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, and I now give the floor to France on Zoom.
Madame la Haute-Commissaire, les restrictions de
l'espace de la société civile se sont aggravées cette année. Les aspirations des populations à la justice et à la démocratie ont été souvent déçues. La France a fermement condamné les coups d'État au Mali et en Birmanie. En Biélorussie, au Nicaragua, nous appelons à la libération immédiate et inconditionnelle de toutes les personnes détenues arbitrairement et notamment des journalistes et de tous ceux qui ont été emprisonnés pour avoir voulu exercer leurs droits et leurs libertés fondamentales. Au Liban, bientôt 1 an après l'explosion au port de Beyrouth, les citoyens attendent des autorités qu'elles respectent leur droit à la vérité et à la justice. Elles doivent mener une enquête crédible, impartiale, indépendante, traduire les responsables en justice. La lutte contre l'impunité au Liban, pays ami, est une priorité fondamentale à laquelle nous sommes très fortement attachés. Au Proche-Orient, seule la solution des 2 États permet de répondre de façon durable aux aspirations légitimes des Palestiniens et des Israéliens. Les droits de l'homme doivent être partout respectés, leur bonne mise en œuvre vérifiée. Madame la Haute-Commissaire, la France appelle de nouveau à ce que des observateurs internationaux indépendants, et notamment vous-même, puissiez disposer d'un accès libre, effectif et sans entrave au Xinjiang. En République centrafricaine, enfin, l'expert indépendant doit bénéficier de toute la sécurité indispensable à la mise en œuvre de son mandat et pouvoir établir les agissements de groupes armés étrangers. Je vous remercie, Madame la Haute-Commissaire.
Thank you. I give the floor to Vietnam for a video statement.
Madam President, Vietnam thanks the High Commissioner for her annual report. We reaffirm our consistent commitment to the promotion and protection of human rights. We support for the work of the High Commissioner and the UN human rights mechanisms and advocate for genuine constructive dialogue. Human rights should not be politicized to interfere in the international affairs of sovereign states or for naming and shaming. In combating the COVID-19 pandemic, we have made our best efforts to ensure effective enjoyment of fundamental human rights with the highest priority for the right to life and to health of the people, particularly the vulnerable groups, while maintaining positive economic growth. The COVID-19 vaccine fund set up by the government and widely supported by the people of Vietnam is among our national measures for speeding up the national vaccine strategy for inclusive recovery. Vietnam joins the growing call for coordinated efforts for scaling up vaccine production to ensure timely and equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines for effective control of the pandemic and the ultimate goal of long-term global public health. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. I give the floor to UNDP for a video statement.
UNDP considers human rights as intrinsic to development and sustainable development as a means to realize all human rights, civic, cultural, economic, political, and social. We value our partnership with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and aim to deepen it even further to advance the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and operationalize the Secretary General's call to action on human rights. Madam High Commissioner, on behalf of UNDP, let me congratulate you for the report on the activities of your office. It acknowledges some of our joint and fruitful work, which includes a global study on the role of national human rights institutions in COVID-19, launched last week, which complements the solid cooperation with over 15 national human rights institutions and the tripartite partnership with OHCHR and the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions. The support to developing national action plans to implement the UN guiding principles on business and human rights in more than 15 countries, checklist for a human rights-based approach to socioeconomic control responses to COVID, and the work at national level in many countries, including South Sudan, the DRC, Uzbekistan, and Central Asia.
Thank you. I now give the floor to Sierra Leone on Zoom.
Madam President, Sierra Leone aligns its statement delivered on behalf of the African Group. Sierra Leone thanks the Commissioner for the presentation of our annual report and for leadership in bringing to light the fact that COVID-19 is not only a health concern, but also has human rights implications. The systemic disruption caused by the pandemic has challenged the capacity of governments to ensure the full enjoyment of human rights. In this regard, my delegation would like to thank the High Commissioner and our office for our continued technical assistance and capacity building support to ensure the functioning of all human rights mechanisms. Sierra Leone welcomes the emphasis placed by your office in providing timely advice on human rights-based response to COVID-19 and offering evidence-based policy options for promoting and protecting human rights during the pandemic recovery process. Sierra Leone's response to COVID-19 pandemic recovery process. My apologies. Sierra Leone welcomes the emphasis placed by your office in providing timely advice on human rights-based responses to COVID-19 and offering evidence-based policy options for protecting and promoting human rights in the pandemic recovery process. Sierra Leone's response to the COVID-19 pandemic is consistent with the laws of Sierra Leone and its international human rights obligations. The global health pandemic has laid bare deep inequality between nations and its disproportionate impact on the most vulnerable. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, and I advise all delegations that the list of speakers has already been closed. I now give the floor to Indonesia for a video statement.
Madam President, Indonesia thanks the High Commissioner for the annual report. We commend the Office of the High Commissioner active engagement in promoting the Secretary General call to action for human rights. These include in enhancing regional dialogue to advance the implementation of the call to action in the field, as well as the attainment of 2030 agenda, or in advancing a new social contract between government, people, civil society, businesses, and others. In this context, the specific needs and demands of relevant states as primary duty bearer should be considered by the office when supporting human rights capacity of state. Correct concept and terminology that are applicable in a particular national context should be used. Respect for social, cultural, and historical diversity and territorial integrity is fundamental to ensure effective cooperation. Moreover, a clearer understanding of local context is crucial in ensuring meaningful contribution by the office toward the attainment of SDGs. Indonesia, on its part, will continue to support the work of the High Commissioner and her office. We will continue to call for the office to work in a fair and objective manner, guided by the principle of universality, impartiality, objectivity, and non-selectivity, constructive dialogue, and cooperation. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the State of Palestine on Zoom.
Thank you, Madam President. We would also like to thank the High Commissioner for her annual update. However, we are disappointed that the situation in the OPT, including East Jerusalem and Israel, has not been addressed during her presentation. While it is true that the situation was addressed during the special session, ever since that session, Israel's occupying power has persisted with the systematic attacks and crimes against the Palestinian people. Israel is taking its colonial occupation and apartheid policies to new extremes, accelerating the appropriation of Palestinian property and land and expanding its illegal settlements, in addition to its campaigns of arbitrary arrests and other grave violations. Moreover, Israel systematically continues to discriminate against the Palestinian people. On 15 June, extremist settlers took the streets in the so-called Flag March, chanting "Death to Arabs" and other racist genocidal slogans against the Palestinian people. The supremacist march took place under the full protection of the Israeli government. The inaction of the international community, its failure to compel Israel to abide by international law and to put an end to the Israeli occupation, the apartheid regime imposed over the Palestinian people, is the reason that we are still here today. Against this backdrop, we continue to choose the legal and peaceful path to defend our rights. This has included the establishment of a commission of inquiry and the request for the High Commissioner to produce a database of business involved in Israeli settlements, with a clear request for it to be annually updated. We continue to be disappointed that no updates have been published. We see no justification for delays. In this regard, we would like to ask why the database has been published only once with no updates. We would like a clear and public explanation. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Portugal for a video statement.
Portugal aligns itself with European Union statement. Madam High Commissioner, we renew our thanks for your committed leadership on the promotion of human rights and their universality. We commend the work of your office, including on the prevention of human rights violations and abuses, and reiterate our support to its mandate and independence. Vaccination against COVID-19 gives the world the hope that we may be closer to overcome the pandemic. However, it is paramount that vaccines are made available universally and without discrimination as public health goods. We join the Secretary General's and your call in this regard, and we are committed to contributing to this joint effort, including through COVAX. Economic, social, and cultural rights have been the most affected by the pandemic, and it is here that recovery efforts need to be focused on. The promotion of the full realization of these rights is a long-standing priority for Portugal. One of the main events of the current Portuguese presidency of the Council of the European Union was the Social Summit last May in Porto. Together with social partners and the civil society, decisive action was taken by the European Union to reinforce implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights. Portugal fully supports the international recognition of the human right to a safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. This right has been enshrined in the Portuguese constitution for many decades. I conclude informing that at this session, Portugal will present again a draft resolution on the right to education, and together with the core group, a resolution renewing the call for a human rights-based approach to all aspects related to HIV/AIDS. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I give the floor to Australia on Zoom.
Thank you, Madam. We thank the for her report, for her work, her office around the world. Australia strongly supports and values the independence of the OHCHR. We call on all UN member states to pay their assessed contributions and use their influence in New York to ensure the office and all mandates authorised by this council are fully funded through the regular budget. Australia reiterates its serious concern over the practice of politically motivated arbitrary arrest, detention and sentencing of foreign nationals. We remind states of their obligations under international human rights law and the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations. Australia remains gravely concerned about the deadly violence being perpetrated against the people of Myanmar. We urgently call on the military regime to refrain from further violence, to engage in dialogue, release all those arbitrarily detained, and return Myanmar to the path of democratic transition. We welcome and support the High Commissioner's request to visit Xinjiang this year, and again call on China to allow urgent, unfettered access to investigate the numerous and credible reports of human rights violations against Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities. Australia will speak separately at this session on our concerns with the human rights situations in Tigray, Syria, Belarus, Venezuela, and Eritrea. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Finland for a video statement.
Madam President, let me thank the High Commissioner and the Special Procedures mandate holders for their reports. They underline the need to introduce impartial and independent monitoring mechanisms where human rights situations deteriorate or when systemic impunity for the most serious crimes under international law takes place. Recently, these kinds of accountability mechanisms have been called for also as regards some Human Rights Council member states. Finland believes that in the future, new technologies and digital spaces will provide better means for monitoring, reporting abuse, and mobilizing support to human rights defenders. As chair of the Freedom Online Coalition, Finland also believes that the internet provides a unique platform for individuals to exercise their rights more fully and to seek, receive and impart information through any media and regardless of frontiers. Finally, we call on Council members and observers to fulfill their international obligations to promote the highest standards of human rights and to cooperate with the Council and its mechanisms. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Bangladesh for a video statement.
Madam President, we thank Madam High Commissioner for her annual report. Everyone has equal rights to dignity and health and to benefit from scientific progress. Unequal and inequitable access to COVID vaccines has jeopardized this principle. We request the office to strengthen its advocacy role to address this existing unfair distribution of vaccines through engaging with the relevant partners. The pandemic has further exacerbated the situation of both regular and irregular migrants. Many of them are facing the grim prospect of losing jobs and the challenges of forced return, making realization of their ESC right extremely difficult. They deserve more attention in the global recovery plans and actions. We are deeply concerned at the deteriorating situation in Myanmar. The Rohingya minorities continues to face serious violations of human rights. there is no progress in creating conducive conditions in Myanmar for the return of the forcibly displaced Rohingyas. We request Madam High Commissioner to engage with the Myanmar and other concerned to put maximum pressure on them to commence repatriation of Rohingyas without further delay. Lastly, we urge the office to continue to make efforts in addressing the nexus between the impact of climate change on the realization of human rights. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Costa Rica on Zoom.
Gracias, señora presidenta. Costa Rica agradece a la señora alta comisionada por la elaboración del informe y reconoce el esfuerzo y dedicación de la oficina para enfrentar las adversidades que en materia de derechos humanos se han presentado a raíz de la pandemia. Mi país celebra las acciones enmarcadas en el plan de gestión de la oficina, así como el impulso dado al llamado a la acción por los derechos humanos del secretario general. Celebramos las declaraciones realizadas por la alta comisionada sobre la importancia de avanzar el reconocimiento del derecho humano a un medio ambiente sano, limpio, seguro y sostenible, y para promover un enfoque común de la ONU sobre la recuperación verde de la pandemia. Reconocemos los esfuerzos para garantizar la colaboración entre los estados y los mecanismos de derechos humanos y consideramos fundamental fortalecer el diálogo para asegurar una debida vigilancia y promoción de los compromisos adquiridos con los mecanismos internacionales, en particular con los procedimientos especiales. Además, compartimos las preocupaciones relativas a la persistencia de formas de racismo, la discriminación racial, el capacitismo, la xenofobia y otras formas conexas de intolerancia, y respaldamos la importancia de generar respuestas participativas e inclusivas. Finalmente, reafirmamos nuestro apoyo incondicional a la oficina para el desarrollo e implementación de programas e iniciativas que garanticen los derechos humanos para todas las personas en todo el mundo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Republic of Korea for a video statement.
Thank you, Madam President. My delegation thanks the High Commissioner for her comprehensive annual report. In our fight against COVID-19, my delegation echoes the emphasis the OHCHR placed on human rights-based responses to the pandemic. In particular, we should work together to address the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on vulnerable social groups. In this vein, my government has recently pledged a contribution to the COVAX AMC with $100 million this year and another $100 million for next year in the form of a combination of financial and in-kind contributions. My delegation also shares the concerns the international community has about the recent spikes in violence and discrimination based on race, including those against Asians. The pandemic must not justify hatred and stigma for any race or group of persons. We encourage the High Commissioner to continue to address this challenge. Madam President, we are pleased to present during this session a follow-up resolution on new and emerging technologies and their human rights implications. The resolution will stress the importance of a human rights-based approach in harnessing digital technologies. We look forward to continued cooperation with the High Commissioner and her office on this agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Fiji for a video statement.
Thank you, President. Fiji extends its appreciation to the High Commissioner for her annual report. We will continue our engagement with the High Commissioner and her office. We recognize that 2020 was a difficult year with the pandemic, and we commend the productivity of her office, even despite the challenges faced. As the report highlights, Fiji ratified the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on the Sale of Children, Child Prostitution and Child Pornography on the 9th of March 2021. We further wish to inform the High Commissioner that we have also ratified the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Child on the Involvement of Children in Armed Conflict on the 29th of March 2021. We appreciate the constructive engagement with the Office of the High Commissioner throughout these processes, and we look forward to future ongoing collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Czech Republic for a video statement.
The Czech Republic aligns itself with your statement. Madam High Commissioner, we thank you for the presentation. We appreciate your efforts and reiterate our support for your independence. We'd like to highlight some of the recent developments that deserve our attention. We are greatly concerned by the massive repression in Belarus, which has created a climate of fear in general public. The manner of arrest and alleged torture of journalist Roman Protasevich is another example of complete disregard for international human rights norms. We call for immediate release of all those unlawfully or arbitrarily detained, including journalists, human rights defenders, and activists. The systematic crackdown on democracy and human rights in Russia is worrying. Recent legislative initiatives contribute to targeting independent voices and further curtail political pluralism in Russia. We are dismayed by the sentencing of Russian opposition figure Alexei Navalny and call for his release. We urge Russia to bring this legislation in line with European and international human rights law. The Czech Republic strongly condemns the military coup in Myanmar and the following violence against peaceful protesters and civilians. We support legitimately elected leaders and those advocating peaceful for stable and inclusive democracy. We reiterate our call for the rule of law and the immediate release of all those arbitrarily detained. We are deeply concerned about the crackdown on political opponents, independent media, and civil society in Nicaragua. We call for the immediate release of dissidents and political contenders. Efforts to criminalize human rights defenders in Venezuela are worrying. Holding a free and fair presidential and parliamentary election is the only way out of the current crisis.
Thank you. I give the floor to Senegal for a video statement.
Madame la Présidente, l'année 2021 est marquée par une progression fulgurante de la pandémie de la COVID-19 qui a ravivé les inégalités mondiales et ralenti considérablement la réalisation du programme de développement à l'horizon 2030. Pour la première fois depuis 20 ans, l'Afrique affichait jusque-là des taux de croissance supérieurs à la moyenne mondiale et en récession à l'exception de quelques rares pays. Il faut reconnaître et saluer les efforts de résilience des pays africains et se féliciter de l'appui des partenaires. Les droits de l'homme sont indivisibles et l'Afrique a besoin, dans son processus actuel de développement, de toutes les ressources disponibles pour amorcer l'émergence et faciliter la pleine réalisation des droits socio-économiques. C'est dans cet esprit que le président de la République du Sénégal, son Excellence M. Macky Sall, a lancé plusieurs appels allant dans le sens d'une dynamique novatrice à 3 niveaux. D'abord, une réforme des règles de financement et d'octroi de crédit export, ensuite un nouvel état d'esprit de partenariat et enfin de nouveaux paradigmes pour un New Deal à défaut d'un plan Marshall pour l'Afrique. Les principes d'égalité, de non-discrimination, de justice et de fraternité que nous chérissons tous subissent des assauts au quotidien eu égard à la montée du nationalisme, du racisme, de l'islamophobie et de l'intolérance. C'est la raison pour laquelle nous devons tous travailler ensemble à l'avènement d'un nouvel ordre mondial qui met l'humain et l'humanité au cœur des relations internationales. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Democratic People's Republic of Korea on Zoom.
Thank you, Madam President. The annual report by High Commissioner shows that still certain countries often find fault with and criminalize the human rights situation of sovereign states, including DPRK, based on false and fabricated information for the despicable political purposes. It is an extreme manifestation of politicization, selectivity, double standard, and confrontation persists in the international human rights arena. The deep-rooted racism and racial discrimination, brutality of police, gun-related crimes, maltreatment of minorities and migrants, human trafficking and sexual violence, as well as the political pressure and military actions which infringe upon the sovereignty of other countries or even threaten the lives of the people in those countries. These are the just tip of the iceberg of worst human rights violations of Western countries. What require the primary attention of HRC are the deplorable human rights situation of these countries with the worst record of human rights violations. The DPRK reiterates its unwavering position to firmly oppose attempts to misuse human rights issues for despicable political purposes and urge certain countries to refrain from using Xinjiang and Hong Kong related issues to interfere China's internal affairs. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Japan for a video statement.
Freedom of expression and freedom of the media are important components of any democratic society. In every country, such fundamental freedoms must be ensured and oppression of human rights defenders and journalists must be prevented. Japan will express its position on specific human rights situations in the relevant sessions. This month, marks the 10th anniversary of the Human Rights Council's endorsement of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. It is increasingly important to promote and protect human rights in business activities, including in supply chains. Japan has formulated its National Action Plan in order to enhance the promotion of human rights. We would appreciate the views of the High Commissioner on the actions that each state should take with a view to promoting respect for human rights in business activities. The issue of abductions by DPRK is a top priority of the Japanese government. As the families of the victims are now advanced in age, there is no time to lose in resolving this issue. Japan counts on the understanding and cooperation of the international community for the resolution of this issue. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Bahrain for a video statement.
في البداية يود وفد بلادي أن يضم صوته إلى بيانات المجموعات الإقليمية والسياسية التي ينتمي لها، كما يود تقديم الشكر لسعادة المفوض السامي لحقوق الإنسان على جهودها الدؤوبة وتقريرها السنوي حول المشاغل المتعلقة بحقوق الإنسان في العالم، لا سيما منها التحديات الأخيرة التي تواجه دول العالم في التصدي لجائحة كورونا والتأثيرات الاقتصادية والاجتماعية. السيدة الرئيسة، يؤكد وفد بلادي على إيمان عميق بأهمية تعزيز وحماية حقوق الإنسان وبناء حالة من التعاون التي تقوم على احترام حق المجتمعات في اختيار القيم والمبادئ المناسبة لها. كما يشيد وفد بلادي بالدور الأساسي لمنظومة الأمم المتحدة في تنسيق الاستجابة العالمية لمكافحة انتهاكات حقوق الإنسان ودعم الدول الأعضاء في ظل التحديات اللي تحصل في عالمنا اليوم، لا سيما انتشار وباء كوفيد-19 الذي أبرز مركزية المساواة وحقوق الإنسان في جدول الأعمال العالمي. لدى يشدد وفد بلادي على أهمية تمتع الأفراد بحق في أعلى مستوى ممكن من الصحة البدنية والعقلية، وعلى أهمية احترام حقوق الإنسان من أجل التصدي لجائحة كورونا التي تمثل تحديا دوليا وجب معالجته في نطاق التعاون والتضامن الدوليين. السيد الرئيس، ختاما يشدد وفد بلادي على أهمية الجهود الجماعية المشتركة لمكافحة وباء كورونا، كما يؤكد على تمسكه بمبادئ التعاون الدولي المنصوص عليها في ميثاق الأمم المتحدة، وخاصة في أوقات الأزمات التي تهدد الحقوق الأساسية للبشرية الجمعاء. شكرا السيدة الرئيسة.
Thank you. I give the floor to Estonia for a video statement.
Distinguished High Commissioner, Madam President, Estonia aligns with a statement by the European Union. We highly appreciate the attention of the High Commissioner on the most acute human rights situations in the world. It is important to keep these situations under the scrutiny of the Human Rights Council and to give a voice for the voiceless. As a member of the UN Security Council, Estonia has stressed the importance of promotion and protection of human rights as a crucial tool for conflict prevention and early warning. We call on all countries to cooperate fully with OHCHR, the treaty bodies and the Council's mechanisms. All independent human rights mechanisms should have full and unconditional access to countries' territories, including occupied areas, to conduct most efficient human rights monitoring. As the UN Secretary-General has noted in his call to action for human rights in times of crisis, the focus must be on preserving human dignity, preventing human rights violations, and on responding promptly and effectively when such violations occur. We welcome and encourage even more reporting from the High Commissioner on emerging human rights concerns and violations as an early warning tool. As new avenues are being used to erode the universal principles of human rights, we must remain vigilant and demand that states respect the human rights, the rule of law, democracy, and civil society space. Madam High Commissioner, what in your view could be done in international cooperation to support people's right to peaceful assembly in their aspirations for democracy, and how to adequately respond to the oppressive authoritarian regime's violence and repressive actions against societies? I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Armenia for a video statement.
President, Armenia thanks High Commissioner for her report and dedicated leadership. We took note of OHCHR activities in the areas of peace and security. It is our conviction that human rights should be mainstreamed for UN response to conflicts. We thoroughly took note of the office's remote monitoring of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. It is regrettable that the office did not succeed in visiting Nagorno-Karabakh, notwithstanding its continued determination to seek access. The spokesperson of the UN Secretary-General has recently clarified loud and clear that Azerbaijan hindered UN access to Nagorno-Karabakh. Another plea of the High Commissioner and Special Procedure mandate holders on the humane treatment and prompt release of prisoners of war and our captives from the recent Nagorno-Karabakh conflict remains unfulfilled, as Azerbaijan refuses to repatriate them. Furthermore, the extrajudicial execution of Armenians identified by the High Commissioner and the Special Procedure mandate holders, as well as other war crimes, remain unaddressed. Azerbaijan's resistance to accountability for grave violations of international law entrenches impunity into the pattern of violence. Urgent action of the international community, the UN human rights machinery, is needed to break it. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Iraq for a video statement.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. يثمن العراق الأنشطة التي قدمتها المفوضية السامية لحقوق الإنسان، ويقدر تعاون المفوضية مع العراق في مجالات عديدة لتعزيز واحترام حقوق الإنسان بالرغم من التحديات التي فرضتها جائحة كورونا. تتعاون حكومة بلادي مع مكتب المفوضية السامية في بغداد وتقدم التسهيلات والدعم من أجل الاطلاع بولايته كإقامة ورشات عمل بشأن مشاريع القوانين التي تعتزم الحكومة العراقية تشريعها، مثل مشروع قانون حماية التنوع الذي أشارت إليه الفقرة 109 من التقرير قيد النقاش، ومشروع قانون الحماية من العنف المنزلي، وعقد ورشات عمل لتعزيز حقوق الإنسان في سياق مكافحة الإرهاب. السيد الرئيس، العراق مقبل على إجراء انتخابات مبكرة، حيث تكللت جهود الحكومة العراقية لضمان نزاهتها وشفافيتها وحريتها بإقرار قانون جديد للانتخابات يدعم عمل المفوضية المستقلة للانتخابات، كما طلب العراق من مجلس الأمن وجامعة الدول العربية مراقبة الانتخابات، وهذا يعكس حرص الحكومة العراقية على إجراء انتخابات حرة تمثل إرادة الناخب العراقي لمستقبل أفضل. إن استمرار التعاون مع المفوضية السامية لحقوق الإنسان والدول الأخرى يتطلب جهودا لتنمية ثقة مستدامة، وهذا الأمر مرهون بالالتزام بمبادئ حقوق الإنسان العالمية.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Syrian Arab Republic on Zoom.
سيد الرئيس، تؤيد سوريا بيانات المجموعات التي تنتمي إليها، وتشكر المفوض السامي على تقريرها السنوي الذي يستعرض نشاطات مكتبها، بما في ذلك تقديم المساعدة التقنية استجابة لطلب الدول. إن تصاعد التدخلات في الشؤون الداخلية للدول ومحاولات زعزعة استقرارها واللجوء لفرض التدابير القسرية الأحادية تحت شعارات حقوق الإنسان Madam President, can you hear me?
I'm sorry, Your Excellency, we're not getting through. Is there a technical problem at your end?
I don't think so.
We can now hear you. Can I check?
You can hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I just want to check the interpreters can also. Your Excellency, you're still there?
Yes. Yes, I'm there.
Okay. Can I check the interpreters?
Shall I start over?
Just right. No, you may proceed, Your Excellency.
سيد الرئيس، تؤيد سوريا بيانات المجموعات التي تنتمي إليها، وتشكر المفوض السامي على تقريرها السنوي الذي يستعرض نشاطات مكتبها، بما في ذلك تقديم المساعدة التقنية استجابة لطلب الدول. إن تصاعد التدخلات في الشؤون الداخلية للدول ومحاولة زعزعة استقرارها واللجوء لفرض التدابير القسرية الأحادية تحت شعارات حقوق الإنسان خلال السنوات الأخيرة لم تؤدي سوى إلى خلق الأزمات الإنسانية المتنقلة وتزايد معدلات الفقر والبطالة والتفاوت داخل الدول وبينها، وخلق تحديات جدية ساهمت جائحة كوفيد-19 في تعميقها. ونرحب في هذا السياق بتجديد المفوض السامي دعواتها إلى إتاحة اللقاحات للجميع وتخفيف عبء الديون ورفع العقوبات ودعم الدول في تحقيق أجندة 2030. إن معالجة الخلل في المشهد الدولي الراهن يتطلب الالتزام بقواعد القانون الدولي وبمبادئ الميثاق واحترام خيارات الشعوب في تقرير مصيرها دون تدخلات خارجية، مع الأخذ بالاعتبار أوضاع الدول وأولوياتها الوطنية. ونجدد في هذا الإطار رفضنا لاستمرار بعض الدول في استغلال هذا البند لتسييس حقوق الإنسان، ونشدد على أهمية التزام التقارير بمبادئ العالمية والحياد والموضوعية التي قام عليها المجلس، وأن تتناول النقاشات كافة الدول وكافة الحقوق بما فيها الحق التنمية على قدم المساواة.
The time is up. I now give the floor to China for a video statement.
主席先生、各位代表、女士们、先生们，大家好，我是新疆维吾尔自治区科协副主席布丽纳尔·吴甫利。当今的新疆社会大局持续稳定向好，已经连续4年多未发生暴恐案件，经济实现高质量发展，综合经济实力不断跃上新台阶，脱贫攻坚取得全面胜利。全区现行标准下306.49万农村贫困人口全面脱贫，3666个贫困村全部退出，35个贫困县全部摘帽，人民生活明显改善。政府每年将一般公共财政预算支出的70%以上用于保障和改善民生，使发展成果更多、更公平地惠及各族人民。民族团结更加巩固，各族群众像石榴籽一样紧紧抱在一起，宗教领域和睦和顺，信教群众正常的宗教活动和宗教需求得到依法保障，各族群众平等享有稳定、安全发展和进步，获得感、幸福感、安全感显著增强。作为一名亲历这些变化的维吾尔族学者，我想说，新疆的人权事业发展进步，全世界有目共睹，也得到了国际社会的积极评价。任何反华势力都破坏不了新疆安定团结的大好局面。谢谢大家。
Thank you. I give the floor to Chile for a video statement.
Señora Presidenta, agradecemos a la Alta Comisionada para los Derechos Humanos la presentación de su informe anual dando cuenta de la amplia agenda de trabajo de su oficina. En particular, saludamos su enfoque en los numerosos desafíos que la pandemia ha planteado a la promoción y protección de los derechos humanos y el apoyo que desde su oficina se ha brindado a los Estados. La pandemia ha puesto de manifiesto las vulnerabilidades institucionales que deben llevarnos a implementar políticas con enfoque de derechos humanos que contribuyan a cerrar las persistentes brechas de desigualdad. Señora Presidenta, en este sentido, como bien señala la Alta Comisionada en su informe, la respuesta a la pandemia nos ofrece la oportunidad de poner a las personas y sus derechos en el centro de los esfuerzos de reconstrucción. Y esa tarea no podemos acometerla en solitario. Necesitamos de la cooperación y la solidaridad de los Estados y del sistema multilateral. En ese contexto, nos preocupa que las restricciones presupuestarias pongan en riesgo los recursos, tanto humanos como financieros, asignados al pilar de derechos humanos de Naciones Unidas, afectando directamente el trabajo en terreno que realiza la Oficina del Alto Comisionado para los Derechos Humanos. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to Burkina Faso on Zoom.
Madame la Présidente, la délégation remercie le haut-commissaire pour la présentation de son rapport annuel et s'associe à la déclaration faite par le groupe africain. Ce rapport, qui intervient dans le contexte difficile marqué par la persistance des défis auxquels est confronté le mandat de la haut-commissaire, ainsi que la pandémie de la COVID-19, souligne les défis complexes en matière de promotion et de protection des droits de l'homme dans toutes les régions du monde et nous interpelle à plus d'action et de solidarité et de coopération multilatérale. Madame la haut-commissaire, le Burkina Faso partage vos préoccupations sur la montée du terrorisme et de l'extrémisme violent à travers le monde, ainsi que leur impact négatif sur la jouissance des droits humains. Pour avoir été la cible d'attaques terroristes récurrentes depuis 2015, le Burkina Faso mesure les conséquences multidimensionnelles de ce phénomène qui entrave l'effectivité de plusieurs droits humains ainsi que les efforts déployés par le gouvernement dans l'atteinte des ODD. Pour faire face au terrorisme et apporter une réponse rapide et coordonnée aux victimes, le Burkina Faso a développé plusieurs initiatives militaires, politiques, économiques et sociales, toutes fondées sur les droits de l'homme. Par ailleurs, le gouvernement veille au strict respect des droits humains par les éléments des forces armées déployés dans le cadre de la lutte contre le terrorisme. Pour terminer, ma délégation réitère son engagement à renforcer sa coopération avec le Bureau du Haut-Commissariat des Nations Unies aux droits de l'homme et salue le soutien apporté au Burkina Faso dans le cadre de la lutte contre le terrorisme. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. I give the floor to India for a video statement.
Madam President, we thank the High Commissioner for presentation of the annual report and take note of the work done by her office for promotion and protection of human rights. I had shared India's perspective on the report during the consultations held earlier. Democracy and freedom have been a part of India's civilizational ethos. As the world's largest democracy, India is committed to promotion and protection of human rights of its citizens, including through inclusive polity and society and sustainable development. We have undertaken targeted policy interventions to empower the vulnerable sections of our society in order to improve their access to education, housing, health care, social protection, sanitation, water supply, etc., and to provide them good governance and opportunities for development. Madam President, in line with our commitment towards global promotion and protection of human rights, we have made a voluntary contribution of $400,000 to UN trust funds. We hope that this will ensure effective participation of small island developing states and least developed countries in the Council. I reiterate my delegation's commitment towards constructive engagement with the Council, the High Commissioner, her office, and other HR mechanisms. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. I give the floor to Malta for a video statement.
Madam President, Malta aligns itself with the EU statement and thanks the High Commissioner for her presentation. In Myanmar, disturbing reports of human rights violations continue to emerge. We support the role ASEAN is playing in finding a lasting solution to this crisis. On the occupied Palestinian territories, there will be no peace and security unless both Israelis and Palestinians enjoy equal rights and live in neighboring sovereign states, recognizing each other's right to exist. Malta reiterates the need to conquer all obstacles to a meaningful two-state solution, with Palestinians and Israelis living in peace side by side. We remain deeply concerned at the deteriorating human rights situation in Belarus and the continued suppression of civil society. We continue to call for the immediate and unconditional release of all political prisoners. Madam High Commissioner, as a frontline state, Malta continues to face several challenges in the area of migration that, to a large extent, are the result of inadequate solidarity and support. Notwithstanding this, we continue to take our obligations under international human rights law very seriously. Finally, we share your concern that the effects of COVID-19 have been widespread and that in planning our next steps towards resuming normality, we should focus on climate change and push for a green recovery. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Republic of Moldova for a video statement.
Madam High Commissioner, allow me to start by commending your proactive leadership demonstrating during these challenging and uncertain times. Your contribution to the cause of human rights worldwide embraces nowadays a broader range of actions than ever, especially given the COVID-19 pandemic and other critical emerging challenges such as climate change and high inequalities. There is one particular issue that we would like to emphasize. Alongside with digital transformation in education, business, healthcare, and many other spheres, we need to act on the role of human rights in the digital age and implement in the international human rights framework in cyberspace. Human rights must stand at the core of governance frameworks for the use of digital technologies. In this respect, we support the creation of the Hub for Human Rights in Digital Technology and the use of new technological tools to monitor and safeguard promotion and respect for human rights worldwide. I would also like to express gratitude to your office for the valuable assistance granted to my country to address the impact of COVID-19, including by providing technical support to adopt a human rights-based approach to data. Likewise, we are particularly grateful for the continuous support of the OHCHR in strengthening institutional capacities for effective governance of national human rights institutions and civil society. In conclusion, allow me to assure you of the Republic of Moldova's continued support for your efforts to strengthen the international human rights system. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Maldives on Zoom. Maldives, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. The Maldives extends its appreciation to the High Commissioner for her annual report. We welcome the work undertaken by the High Commissioner to promote and protect human rights during these extraordinary times. We also applaud her office for adapting to the current situation by providing remote human rights monitoring and online delivery of technical assistance and capacity building support. Madam President, the Maldives has taken significant steps to strengthen human rights, democracy, and the rule of law at the national level. This includes the ratification of the First Amendment to the Public Health Protection Act. The amendment improves the protocols to govern the state of public health emergency declared in response to the COVID-19 pandemic and future such crises. The President also ratified the Climate Emergency Act that further strengthens the legal framework to address climate issues. On 17 May this year, the Women's Development Committees were elected by a public vote for the first time to reach a new milestone in women's empowerment. Before concluding, I would also like to state that China has been an important development partner, and our relationship is based on mutual respect of each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity. We therefore reiterate our firm commitment to the long-standing One China policy. We are confident that under the principle of one country, two systems, the Chinese people will continue to prosper and enjoy economic benefits and universally accepted fundamental freedoms. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. I give the floor to Morocco for a video statement.
Madame la Présidente, Madame la Haute Commissaire, ma délégation prend bonne note du rapport de la Haute Commissaire et affirme son soutien pour une application effective des chantiers ambitieux du Haut Commissariat. Ma délégation exprime ses sérieuses préoccupations quant aux violations massives s'opérant en Algérie et qui continuent malgré les multiples appels lancés de par le monde pour éviter la déstabilisation de ce pays voisin, dont les gouvernants sont interpellés fortement, y compris sur la légitimité non seulement de leurs actes, mais aussi plus gravement de leur représentativité. Malgré les contraintes de la pandémie, le Maroc a maintenu la cadence de mise en œuvre du plan d'action national en matière de démocratie et des droits de l'homme. À ce titre, 4 réalisations importantes. Premièrement, la publication du rapport de la Commission spéciale sur le modèle de développement qui trace les contours d'un modèle basé sur la solidarité, l'égalité des chances entre hommes et femmes, la justice sociale et liberté, la durabilité, en perspective de construire une société émancipée, partenaire d'un État fort. Deuxièmement, la décision de Sa Majesté le roi Mohammed VI relative au règlement définitif de la question des mineurs marocains non accompagnés se trouvant en situation irrégulière dans certains pays étrangers. Troisièmement, l'établissement de 2 conventions portant respectivement sur la protection et le renforcement des droits des personnes en situation de handicap et la promotion des valeurs de droits de l'homme dans la sphère scolaire et universitaire. Quatrièmement, la mise en place d'un guide pour standardiser et mieux gérer les situations de grève de la faim au sein des établissements pénitentiaires. Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Lebanon on Zoom.
السيدة الرئيسة، اطلع لبنان على تقرير المفوضة السامية ويشكرها هي وطاقمها على كافة الإنجازات التي تحققت في الفترة بين تموز 2020 وآذار 2021 وندلي بالملاحظات التالية. يثني لبنان على آليات حقوق الإنسان التي حافظت على إنتاجيتها على الرغم من الظروف الاستثنائية التي يمر بها العالم والتي عرفت كيف تتأقلم معها. كما نعترف بدور هذه الآليات المحوري في إعلاء قيم حقوق الإنسان وفي رفض جهود الوقاية من انتهاكات هذه الحقوق. كما ويجدد لبنان التزامه بالانفتاح عليها وبالتعاون البناء معها، خاصة فيما يتعلق بعملها في لبنان. وفي هذا المجال يشدد لبنان على أهمية مشاريع التعاون التقني وبناء القدرات، شرط أن تتناسب مع حاجات الفعلية للدول المستفيدة. كما نؤكد على ضرورة أن تتسم مداولات المجلس ونشاطات الإجراءات الخاصة بالموضوعية بعيداً عن الانتقائية والتسييس والمعايير المزدوجة. السيدة الرئيسة، نظراً للظروف الصعبة التي يمر بها العالم جراء الجائحة وتكاثر النزاعات وارتفاع نسب الفقر كما أعداد النازحين قسطاً والمهاجرين، ندعو آليات حقوق الإنسان إلى مواكبة الجهود التي تصب في تحقيق أهداف التنمية المستدامة عبر التمسك بالتعددية والحوار وإيلاء الحقوق الاجتماعية والاقتصادية الأهمية التي تستحق. شكراً السيدة الرئيسة.
Thank you. I give the floor to Norway for a video statement.
Madam President, we thank the High Commissioner for her oral update and the OHCHR for their tireless efforts during these challenging times. As we are managing the global crisis and slowly starting to rebuild after the COVID-19 pandemic, it is essential that human rights and gender equality are at the core of national strategies to build fairer, safer, and more equal and democratic societies. A strong and empowered civil society is an invaluable part of a resilient and genuine democracy. Civil society should have a prominent role in both pandemic response and post-pandemic rebuilding to ensure that these efforts are truly democratic and representative. It is unacceptable that those who seek to defend fundamental rights are exposed to threats and violence. The worrying trend that we have seen during the pandemic of restrictions and attacks against human rights defenders, civil society and media must be reversed. All countries should create a safe and enabling environment for all. Madam High Commissioner, how can states ensure constructive participation of civil society, including women's organizations, in the rebuilding after the pandemic? And finally, the OHCHR, together with the Ethiopian Commission for Human Rights, plays an important role in investigating alleged human rights violations in Tigray. Human rights situations in Tigray is serious and it should be placed on the formal agenda of the Council. Thank you.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Algeria for a video statement.
Madame la Présidente, ma délégation remercie la haute commissaire pour la présentation de son rapport. Elle apprécie grandement la vision du HCDH et son engagement s'agissant de la promotion du droit au développement, des droits économiques, sociaux et culturels, de la lutte contre l'extrême pauvreté et des droits des migrants. Ma délégation se félicite de la tenue de la 30e session spéciale du CDH et accorde la plus haute importance aux résultats de ses travaux. Elle invite la haute commissaire à faire publier la mise à jour des données des entreprises impliquées dans les activités liées directement ou indirectement aux colonies d'occupation, comme l'avait initialement demandé notre Conseil en 2016 dans sa résolution 3136. Ma délégation note, au titre du chapitre consacré aux réfugiés, que si certaines situations sont mentionnées, il est étonnant que celle relative aux réfugiés sahraouis, la seconde plus longue situation dans le monde, soit passée sous silence. Cette interrogation est d'autant plus légitime que ce territoire est non autonome et au sens du droit international, sous la responsabilité des Nations Unies, et que le HCDH, en vertu de son mandat, est tenu de protéger les populations civiles se trouvant dans cette juridiction onusienne. Ma délégation réitère les appels pour l'envoi de missions techniques, le déploiement d'une mission d'observation, ainsi que le renforcement des capacités de la Commission sahraoui des droits de l'homme. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Islamic Republic of Iran.
Thank you, Madam President. I thank Madam High Commissioner for presenting her annual update. Protection of human rights for all entails human solidarity. The increasing instrumentalization of human rights for political ends and selective approaches have reduced human rights into a tool of convenience. Meanwhile, there is a tendency either to normalize certain cases of protracted human rights situations, such as in occupied Palestine, and systematic racism and racial discrimination in the Western Hemisphere, or just to pass over certain other cases, such as war crimes in Afghanistan by NATO forces, or mass killings of indigenous kids on their forced assimilation project in Canada. The pandemic governance and the ensuing inequities, in particular vaccine nationalism, have also showed how far we are from a human rights-based approach in dealing with a global health emergency. The intensifying unilateral coercive measures against huge population in developing world have been very telling in this respect. As a result, we have to face another crisis of solidarity that may lead to collective numbness if left unattended. The human rights mechanism should not shy away from attending to the overwhelming and massive rights abuses that are generated by prolonged occupation, frequent military and other interventions, unilateral coercive measures, systematic racial discrimination and xenophobia, as well as arms sale. The UN human rights machinery need to keep immune from political biases that could cost it compromising the basic principles of universality, impartiality, objectivity, and non-selectivity in their functioning. Thank you.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Venezuela for a video statement.
Gracias, Presidenta. El mandato conferido a la Oficina de la Alta Comisionada se basa en un espíritu de diálogo con los gobiernos, en apego a los principios universales del respeto a la soberanía y a la no injerencia en los asuntos internos. Preocupa la insistente pretensión de algunos estados de instrumentalizar los derechos humanos para criminalizar a los países en desarrollo. Promueven informes de la oficina que se usan para desatar terribles campañas mediáticas e imponer ilegales medidas coercitivas unilaterales, obviando los esfuerzos de estos países en pro de los derechos humanos. Por ejemplo, tenemos el caso de Xinjiang, objeto de ilegales medidas coercitivas unilaterales que violan el derecho de su pueblo al desarrollo y al mayor bienestar posible. No es concebible tampoco que en plena crisis financiera la oficina destine mayor tiempo e ingentes recursos para señalamientos negativos sobre los derechos humanos en los países del sur, en vez de reforzar la cooperación y los avances en el ámbito de los derechos humanos en estos países. Seguiremos exigiendo el debido equilibrio y el tratamiento objetivo de los países en los informes de la oficina sin distinción alguna. Reiteramos el llamado para que la oficina fortalezca y priorice la cooperación en derechos humanos, así como la efectiva denuncia de las ilegales medidas coercitivas unilaterales. Finalmente, Venezuela se adhiere a la declaración de Azerbaiyán a nombre del Movimiento de No Alineados y a China en nombre del LMG. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the Lao People's Democratic Republic on Zoom.
Madam President, Madam High Commissioner, I wish to assure you that the Lao government is committed to application under international human rights instrument to which it is party and attaches great importance to the UN human rights mechanism, including the Japan process. Promotion and protection of human rights is the heart of the policy of the Lao government. The Constitution of the Lao PDR acknowledges, respect, protect, and guarantee the human rights and fundamental rights of each citizen without discrimination based on any ground. Madam President, the COVID-19 continues to spread in the world and pose a significant challenge to all countries, including the Lao PDR. Its negative impact on our economy and on sectors of society are deepening with increased poverty. Amid these challenges, the Lao government has worked closely with ASEAN family and international community in the fight against the COVID-19 and the country to ensure progressive realizations of the HDG and human rights obligations. Madam President, on Hong Kong, Xinjiang, and Tibet-related issues, we consider that these are China's internal affairs, and we wish to reiterate the Lao PDR support for the One China policy. We also witness a significant progress made in maintaining and promoting peace, stability, and social order in Xinjiang. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Kyrgyzstan for a video statement.
Спасибо, госпожа председатель. Пользуясь случаем, мы хотели бы вновь заявить о непреклонной приверженности Кыргызстана идее защиты прав человека. Кыргызстан поддерживает стремление международного сообщества, в том числе к Совету ООН по правам человека, к проведению конструктивного взаимодействия и сотрудничества между государствами с целью оказания технической помощи им, как основным носителям обязательств по защите прав человека. Считаем, что добросовестное соблюдение принципов международного права, взятых государствами, имеет важнейшее значение для поддержания международного мира и безопасности. В то же время Кыргызстан убежден, что международные правозащитные механизмы не должны использоваться как инструмент для вмешательства во внутренние дела государств. Напоминая резолюцию 60251 Генеральной Ассамблеи ООН, Кыргызстан выступает за то, чтобы проблема прав человека рассматривалась в глобальном контексте на основе принципов универсальности, беспристрастности, объективности и неполитизации. Благодарю за внимание.
Thank you. I give the floor to Egypt for a video statement.
الرئيس يرحب وفد مصر بالمفوضة السامية ويأخذ علما بالتقرير السنوي المقدم، ويثمن الوفد جهود مكتب المفوضة السامية خلال العام الماضي لدعم الآليات التعهدية لحقوق الإنسان وخبرائها في ظل الجائحة، ويؤكد أهمية تعزيز المخصصات المالية الخاصة بهم. وفيما يتعلق ببرامج التعاون الفني وبناء القدرات، فإن مصر تطلع لتعزيز التعاون مع مكتب المفوضة السامية في هذا المجال. في سياق موازي يؤكد الوفد أن المادة السادسة من العهد الدولي للحقوق المدنية والسياسية قد أوضحت بما لا يدع مجالا للشك عدم فرض أي التزام على الدول لوقف اللجوء إلى الحق السيادي في استخدام عقوبة الإعدام كأداة من أدوات العدالة الجنائية، كما لا يوجد توافق دولي على أن تطبيق عقوبة الإعدام وفقا للإجراءات وضمانات قانونية سليمة ونزيهة يمثل انتهاكا لحقوق الإنسان، أو أنه لا يعد رادعا لوقف الجرائم الأشد خطورة. ومن ثم تعرب مصر عن أسفها للانحياز وتبني مكتب المفوضة السامية لرؤية غير محايدة في هذا الشأن. كما يعرب الوفد عن الأسف إزاء استخدام التقارير بعض المصطلحات الخلافية غير التوافقية. شكرا السيد الرئيس.
Thank you. I give the floor to the United States for a video statement.
We welcome the High Commissioner's invaluable work to shed light on the human rights situations in Belarus, Burundi, China, the DPRK, Egypt, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Iran, Libya, Myanmar, Nicaragua, Russia, Saudi Arabia, South Sudan, Sri Lanka, Syria, Venezuela, and Yemen, among others. We urge you to speak out against the atrocities in Xinjiang, China. We condemn Belarus's detention of Roman Protasiewicz after the forced diversion of his commercial flight. We call for his release and that of all political prisoners unjustly detained by the Lukashenko regime. We are deeply concerned by the human rights abuses in Tigray, Ethiopia, including those involving sexual violence. We support the OHCHR Ethiopian Human Rights Commission's joint investigation into abuses committed by all parties. We condemn the military coup in Myanmar and call for cessation of violence, the release of all of those unjustly detained, and the restoration of Myanmar's democratic transition. We reiterate in the strongest terms our support for the work of special procedures in the United Nations processes globally. We commend OHCHR's support for the special procedure mandate holders in developing tools to respond to human rights challenges related to the COVID-19 pandemic. It is critical we protect special procedures mandates against attempts to undermine their credibility, independence, or effectiveness. How can you and member states best support the effectiveness of special mandate holders?
Thank you, and I give the floor to Jordan on Zoom.
شكرا السيدة الرئيسة. إن جوهر تعزيز واحترام حقوق الإنسان ينبع أساسا من إجراء حوار متعاون دوليين بناءين في إطار مضامين ميثاق الأمم المتحدة والمبادئ الدولية المتفق عليها وأدوات ومواثيق حقوق الإنسان، بما فيها رعاية الأقليات والتعاون الوثيق بناء على معلومات الموضوعية، وحق الدول بالدفاع عن نفسها وبمكافحة الإرهاب، وضمان سيادتها ووحدة وسلامة أراضيها، وعدم التدخل في شؤونها الداخلية. فالتنمية والسلام والأمن وحقوق الإنسان هي عناصر مترابطة ويعزز بعضها بعضا. وبالإشارة لبعض المسائل التي تم التطرق إليها في جلسات المجلس الموقر وموقف الصين الواضح منها وجهودها التي تبذلها تجاهها، نعيد التأكيد على المبادئ التي يسترشد بها مجلسنا الموقر في عمله، ومن ضمنها مبادئ العالمية والموضوعية والحياد والشفافية والعدالة، انطلاقا من مسؤولية جميع الدول عن احترام حقوق الإنسان والحريات الأساسية للجميع. ندعو المجلس الموقر لمواصلة عمله بتعزيز حقوق الإنسان حول العالم ضمن هذه المبادئ السامية. شكرا السيدة الرئيسة.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Greece for a video statement.
Greece allies itself with the EU statement. In his 2020 call to action on human rights, the Secretary General stated that, I quote, global challenges are more connected than ever, but our responses are more fragmented, unquote. A timely observation, considering how the COVID-19 pandemic got its grip on the world, perpetuating and exacerbating inequalities and impacting human rights in a manner never envisaged before. Madam High Commissioner, in your report, you mentioned your efforts against domestic and gender-based violence, which increased during lockdowns. The decision by Turkey to withdraw from the Istanbul Convention in such a context is particularly troubling and reflects the deterioration of respect for human rights, rule of law, and the independence of the judiciary. Greece remains concerned by the human rights situation in Belarus. The recent state hijack of the Athens-Vilnius flight is one of the many symptoms of the complete disregard for human rights and international law. Indeed, human rights cannot flourish where international law is blatantly flouted. This is the case in Libya, where the presence and actions of foreign forces, fighters and mercenaries, and the disregard for basic principles of international law hinder efforts to build stability. Madam High Commissioner, in conclusion, we commend your office's capacity to adjust challenges. We remain fully committed to unrestricted cooperation with the OHCHR, as well as with all treaty bodies and special procedures mandate holders. I thank you.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Slovakia for a video statement.
Slovakia associates itself with the statement of the European Union.
Through your report, Madam High Commissioner, we face the fact that a lot of people continue to suffer from violations of their human rights and fundamental freedoms. COVID-19 deepened inequalities even further. But let us also face the fact, and I will use the words from your report, that poor governance, corruption, lack of rule of law, limited access to justice, discrimination, and weak institutions threaten the very basis of human dignity and human rights. Slovakia firmly believes that only strong democratic institutions, systems based on rule of law, can survive the worst test of pandemics. In this juncture, allow me to congratulate the OHCHR and you, Madam High Commissioner, for providing various forms of help and assistance to building the human rights institutions and for raising not only the awareness about, but also the capabilities for human rights-based response to COVID-19. At the same time, we should remind ourselves that no fighting with pandemics can justify arbitrary, unlawful, unjustified interference with universally recognized individual human rights. Having said that, we note with appreciation that the OHCHR, Human Rights Council, as well as treaty bodies or even special procedures, managed to adapt their functioning to this new situation and carry out their work by new means of online assistance, virtual or hybrid meetings, or remote monitoring. Finally, my question, is OHCHR considering to adapt its functioning to some new ways of online operation? I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Namibia for a video statement.
Madam President, Namibia aligns itself to the statements delivered on behalf of the African Group and NAM. We take this opportunity to make a few remarks on the report regarding the activities of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights for the period 1st July 2020 to 15 March 2021. Namibia extends her sincere gratitude to the High Commissioner for Human Rights and her team for their tireless efforts in promoting respect for human rights in various countries around the world. Just over a month ago, Namibia was successfully reviewed by the UPR Working Group of the Human Rights Council. We acknowledge the report provided by the OHCHR in preparation of Namibia's national report for its third cycle UPR. Namibia further extends her thanks to the OHCHR for the support provided to states, including Namibia, in preparing reports for their treaty bodies. Whilst expressing our gratitude, we again call on the office to resume its technical missions to Western Sahara and to regularly update the Council on the situation of human rights in Western Sahara. We regret to note that the report of the OHCHR does not make reference to any activities undertaken by the office with respect to Western Sahara, and the need to support and promote respect for human rights in Western Sahara has become even more pertinent with the violation of the ceasefire agreement on 13 November 2020. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. And I give the floor to South Africa on Zoom.
Thank you, Madam President. South Africa aligns itself with the statement of the African Group and NAM. South Africa welcomes the High Commissioner's annual report and thanks the office for its agility in adapting to the new circumstances, as well as providing appropriate policy advice to respond to challenges. We thank you for the technical assistance provided to our country in the past year. South Africa's late former President Nelson Mandela pronounced in 1993 that human rights will be the light that guides South Africa's foreign policy. To date, South Africa remains true to this commitment. We've further made the Bill of Rights a cornerstone of our country's constitutional democracy. Our engagement with the Council is always guided by this commitment to human rights. Madam President, South Africa reiterates that abuse of the agenda of the Council for political gains in a selective manner and with double standards runs counter to the founding principles of the Human Rights Council. My delegation encourages members of the Council to have a victim-centered approach to human rights. That way, the Council will remain true to the letter and spirit of its founding principles. We ought to do everything possible to ensure that the Council does not suffer the same fate as its predecessor, the Commission on Human Rights. Madam President, in our quest to promote and protect human rights, the community of nations should also be guided by and remain true to the International Bill of Rights and the principles of the Charter of the UN, including respect for the sovereignty of nations and non-interference in the domestic affairs of member states. I thank you.
Thank you. And I give the floor to Austria for a video statement.
My Commissioner, thank you for your report and presentation today. We share your concern that during the last year, protests and dissent have often been met with disproportionate responses and force, leading to a progressive shrinking of the civic space. We therefore reiterate our concern about the targeting and arbitrary arrests of human rights defenders, lawyers and journalists, including in Belarus, Turkey, Iran and Egypt, and call on the authorities of these countries to respect and protect their rights. Repression and violence against peaceful protests in Myanmar are equally unacceptable. In this regard, we are alarmed by the increasing repression of civil society organizations in Russia. The ruling that organizations related to Alexei Navalny are extremist is a further alarming step towards a shrinking space for civil society and the outlawing of a genuine political opposition. Madam High Commissioner, OSCE also expresses its grave concerns at the recent erosion of democratic elements of the electoral system in Hong Kong and the arrests of pro-democracy activists and politicians. We also reiterate our concerns previously expressed regarding Xinjiang. Finally, Madam High Commissioner, OSCE remains concerned by the reports on serious violations and abuses of international human rights and humanitarian law in Tigray. We're encouraged that the joint mission of OHCHR and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission has started its operations and would like to encourage you to continue reporting to the Council on this progress. Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Latvia for a video statement.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, Latvia fully allies with the statement delivered on behalf of the European Union. My delegation joins previous speakers in thanking you, Madam High Commissioner, for presenting your annual report to the Council. When considering how to recover better, we must not forget those who, throughout the pandemic, and have been at the forefront of promoting and protecting human rights worldwide, and often have been in the first to sound alarm bells of human rights violations. In this regard, we are deeply worried by the continued attempt of some states to restrict activities of civil society actors and to limit their rights to freedom of expression, of peaceful assembly, and of associations. Latvia is a staunch supporter of free, independent, responsible, and pluralistic media. Unfortunately, many states continue to restrict and censor the media and prosecute, arrest, detain, torture, and even kill journalists and media workers. All states must do their utmost to prevent violence, threats, and attacks against journalists and to ensure accountability for crimes committed. Madam High Commissioner, in conclusion, I would like to reiterate my country's unwavering support to the mandate and independence of your office. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. I give the floor to Azerbaijan on Zoom.
Thank you, Madam President. Azerbaijan is keen to further develop cooperation with the office through constructive dialogue and based on the new realities which have emerged in our region after signing of the trilateral statement of 10 November 2020, which has put an end to nearly 30-year-long armed conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And these new realities have to be taken into account by the office, in particular while referring to the communications to the territories of Azerbaijan. Currently, Azerbaijan is actively engaged in the restoration of its liberated territories to ensure safe return of the displaced Azerbaijani population. However, mines planted by Armenia and Azerbaijan continue to threaten lives of population of Azerbaijan. And we call upon the High Commissioner to urge Armenia to live up to its obligations under international law and to immediately hand over maps of minefields to Azerbaijan. The statement of Armenian ambassador this morning raises a lot of questions because it is a reflection of those warmongering political forces of Armenia which still cannot accept the failure of the aggressive policy against my country and which were defeated at the recent parliamentary elections. So I don't know who is presenting the official policy of Armenia in this session. That's a big question. And finally, I would like to say that the territorial integrity and non-interference in internal affairs are important principles enshrined in the UN Charter. And we stress that issues brought to the attention of the Council, including those related to China, must be approached in full conformity with these principles. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. I give the floor to Sri Lanka for a video.
Madam President, Sri Lanka notes with deep regret that despite our continuous efforts to present accurate facts to the OHCHR relating to the situation in Sri Lanka, none of this is reflected in the statements that are made by the OHCHR on Sri Lanka. The references to Sri Lanka made by the High Commissioner yesterday were based on inaccurate and misleading information provided to her by parties that have continued to build and perpetuate a negative narrative with regard to the government of Sri Lanka for reasons other than human rights. We regret that owing to the modalities of the current session with no general debates and extremely limited speaking time, the government of Sri Lanka will not get the space to effectively respond to the allegations contained in the High Commissioner's statement. We reaffirm that respect for sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity of states represents the bedrock of international relations. In this context, we note that Hong Kong, Xinjiang and Tibet-related matters are China's internal affairs that brook no interference by external parties. We commend China's efforts in promoting economic and social development, maintaining social stability and safeguarding human rights, including economic, social and cultural rights, and the right to development of the people of all ethnic groups in Xinjiang. We support China's implementation of the one country, two systems policy in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. Thank you.
Thank you. And I give the floor to Sudhan on Zoom.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. يشكر السودان السيد المفوض السامي لحقوق الإنسان على استعراض تقريرها بشأن أوضاع حقوق الإنسان حول العالم، ويشيد بالجهود التي بذلتها المفوضية في مختلف أنحاء العالم بغرض تعزيز أوضاع حقوق الإنسان، كما يرحب بصورة خاصة بمستوى التعاون القائم مع مكتب المفوض السامي في السودان. سيد الرئيس، أولى السودان خلال الأشهر الفائتة أهمية مضاعفة لتعزيز الإطار القانوني والتشريعي لأوضاع حقوق الإنسان في السودان، فأعلن الانضمام لاتفاقية مناهضة التعذيب وغيره من ضروب المعاملة والعقوبة القاسية والإنسانية والمهينة، واتفاقية حماية جميع الأشخاص من الاختفاء القسري، كما أعلن الانضمام لاتفاقية القضاء على جميع أشكال التمييز ضد المرأة سيدو، ذلك بالإضافة إلى مصادرته على اتفاقية حرية العمل النقابي والبروتوكول الخاص بالعمل الجبري في إطار حماية وتعزيز الحريات الأساسية ومن ضمنها حرية التجمع السلمي وتكوين الجمعيات. وتأتي تلك الخطوات التزاما بالتعهدات التي قطعتها حكومة بلادي بتعزيز واحترام قيم حقوق الإنسان الأساسية، ومواصلة للطريق الذي بدأته بمراجعة وإدخال العديد من التعديلات والإصلاحات المهمة على القانون الجنائي، خاصة التي مثلت انتهاكا لحقوق المرأة والطفل وحرية الدين والمعتقد. شكرا سيدة الرئيسة.
I believe the statement is finished. Yes. I now give the floor to Belarus for a video statement.
Сложно не согласиться, что условия функционирования УВКПЧ и правозащитных механизмов в отчетный период из-за пандемии COVID-19 были непростыми. Одновременно мы не можем не отметить целый ряд ярко выразившихся деструктивных тенденций в работе управления. Прежде всего хотим обратить внимание Верховного комиссара и других функционеров УВКПЧ и спецпроцедур СПЧ на недопустимость использования неуважительной терминологии по отношению к государствам-членам, особенно в новостных сообщениях. Какими бы ни были взгляды на события в стране, сотрудники секретариата и мандатарии спецпроцедур обязаны сохранять нейтральность и поддерживать с государствами уважительный диалог. Мы также глубоко обеспокоены фактом все большей утраты управлением самостоятельности во взаимоотношениях с государствами. УВКПЧ фактически играет роль женевского придатка Европейской службы внешних действий и является проводником подходов и политики ЕС, в том числе и по отношению к Республике Беларусь. Мы отмечаем все больше выраженный характер двойных стандартов, когда УВКПЧ и спецпроцедуры Совета систематически реагируют на события в одних и тех же странах и игнорируют их в западных государствах. В данном контексте Беларусь считает, что УВКПЧ, являясь частью секретариата ООН, подотчетен всему членскому составу ООН, а не только одной отдельной группе стран.
Thank you. I give the floor to Ireland for a video statement.
Ireland aligns with the statement of the European Union. We thank the High Commissioner for her oral update. Ireland remains a staunch supporter of her office and of its independence. We are grateful for the many important reports presented to this session and share the concerns articulated by the High Commissioner about rising inequality and increasing pressures on democratic and civic space in every geographic region. Ireland will make statements under the relevant interactive dialogues, including on the human rights situations in Belarus, Myanmar and the occupied Palestinian territory. We remain deeply concerned by the deteriorating humanitarian situation in Tigray. We welcome the ongoing joint investigation by the OHCHR and the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission into allegations of serious violations of international human rights law and international humanitarian law, including widespread reports of sexual and gender-based violence. We agree with the High Commissioner's assessment that this is a time of grave setbacks for human rights. Inequalities have exacerbated by the pandemic, and Ireland agrees that the global response must be strongly rooted in a human rights-based approach to recovery, with the UN at the heart of the response. Madam High Commissioner, as we navigate a way through this next phase of the pandemic, what can states do to support the meaningful participation of civil society in the recovery process? Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Pakistan for a video statement.
We welcome the High Commissioner's continued monitoring of the situation in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Since the second Kashmir report, the human rights conditions in the occupied territory have further deteriorated as a result of India's illegal actions of August 2019. India continues to defy UN Security Council resolutions and the Fourth Geneva Convention by accelerating the pace of demographic engineering of the disputed territory and reportedly additional unlawful actions. More than 3.5 million foreigners have been granted Kashmiri citizenship, allowed to buy property and local jobs. On top of it, over 900,000 occupation forces continue to kill, torture, arbitrarily arrest and detain hundreds of Kashmiris under the cover of draconian laws, use of state terrorism and imposition of an iron curtain. The Hindutva Raj has muzzled the local judiciary, gagged the media, silenced the civil society through reprisal attacks, and denied access to foreign media or UN human rights machinery. A group of UN special procedures have even described the situation to be in free fall and called on the global community to step up. Today, Pakistan echoes this call for action. The Council must hold India accountable for its widely documented crimes. The global flag bearers of human rights should practice what they preach and call out India's grave violations. We reiterate our request to the High Commissioner to issue a report on the situation in Jammu and Kashmir in exercise of our prevention mandate. I thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor to Belgium for a video statement.
Madame la Présidente, Madame la Haut-Commissaire, par le passé, ce Conseil a adopté plusieurs résolutions soulignant le renforcement mutuel entre démocratie et droits humains. Cela n'a toutefois pas permis d'éviter les graves revers subis par les défenseurs de la démocratie ces derniers mois. Dans de nombreux pays dans le monde, du Myanmar à la Biélorussie, la volonté du peuple a été ignorée et la volonté de quelques-uns de se maintenir au pouvoir a mené à de graves violations des libertés et des droits fondamentaux. De manière inquiétante, de telles actions ont été tolérées, voire même activement soutenues par certaines puissances mondiales. En Ouganda, en Algérie, au Nicaragua, en Colombie, que ce soit dans un contexte post- ou pré-électoral, nous appelons les autorités à garantir le droit de réunion pacifique, à respecter la liberté d'expression et à mener des enquêtes impartiales sur toutes les violations présumées des droits humains. Si nous reconnaissons qu'il n'y a pas un seul modèle démocratique, il convient de rappeler que les systèmes démocratiques ont en commun une solide participation citoyenne, la liberté d'expression et des institutions fortes et indépendantes. Alors que la pandémie actuelle a aggravé les inégalités et les vulnérabilités, nous partageons tous la volonté de reconstruire en mieux nos sociétés. Pour ce faire, nous appelons au renouvellement collectif de l'engagement en faveur des droits fondamentaux que sont la liberté d'expression, la liberté d'association et de réunion pacifique. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Botswana on Zoom. I understand that Botswana is not in the room at present. I now give the floor to Nigeria on Zoom.
Thank you, Madam President. Nigeria aligns itself with the statement delivered on behalf of the African Group. We take note of the High Commissioner's annual report and commend her and the office for the unwavering commitment to the promotion and protection of human rights across the globe. Nigeria reiterates its continued support and cooperation with the High Commissioner and her office in the fulfillment of its international human rights obligations. Nigeria reaffirms its commitment to the promotion and protection of human rights and has continued to adopt necessary and appropriate measures in this regard. Nigeria remains undaunted in addressing its multiple security challenges as paramount to achieving sustainable peace and security, being a cardinal objective among the priorities of the Nigerian government. To this end, we reiterate our call for international cooperation and collaboration as we work stridently to address the security challenges and to secure and to ensure the full enjoyment of human rights by our people. Nigeria is also working assiduously through the adoption of various development measures to address the country's economic challenges, which, like many others across the globe, has negatively been impacted by the global pandemic. The Nigerian Economic Sustainability Plan has been yielding positive results, further enhancing the socio-economic well-being of our population, as well as the enjoyment of human rights and fundamental freedoms. To conclude, Nigeria reiterates its call for non-politicization of human rights issues and avoidance of double standard, respect for sovereign equality of nations, as well as strong commitment to multilateralism and international solidarity. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Côte d'Ivoire for a video statement.
Madame la Présidente, la Côte d'Ivoire remercie Madame la Haute Commissaire pour son rapport et la félicite pour le travail accompli en vue de la promotion et de la protection des droits humains, notamment en matière d'assistance technique et de renforcement des capacités. Aussi, la Côte d'Ivoire voudrait exhorter les États ainsi que les autres parties prenantes à prendre les mesures nécessaires en vue de remplir leurs obligations internationales en matière des droits de l'homme et assurer la protection des droits humains et le bien-être des populations. Dans cette optique, la délégation ivoirienne encourage la haute commissaire à poursuivre ses efforts en vue d'un dialogue constructif avec les pays concernés afin d'éviter une polarisation des débats sur la question des droits de l'homme. Nous voudrions également inviter le Conseil à demeurer fidèle à ce principe d'universalité, d'objectivité, de non-sélectivité et non-politisation dans le cadre de l'examen de la situation des droits de l'homme dans certains pays, notamment en Chine, avec la situation au Xinjiang, la question de la gestion d'initiatives de sécurité de Hong Kong et celle du Tibet. Pour conclure, je voudrais réaffirmer la volonté et l'engagement du gouvernement ivoirien à œuvrer en faveur d'une meilleure promotion et protection des droits de l'homme des populations vivant sur son territoire. Je vous remercie, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Timor-Leste in person.
Thank you, Madam President. Timor-Leste thanks the High Commissioner for her oral update and further welcome the 2020 annual report of the Human Rights Commissioner. The report includes Timor-Leste as one of the spotlights, especially with respect to Timor-Leste effort to better integrate disability through the adoption of regulation by the Ministry of Public Works, which stipulated that all public and private buildings must accommodate persons with disability. The strong cooperation and engagement with the UN Human Rights Team in Dili is worth monitoring last year. Timor-Leste focused on providing human rights training for the National Army and strengthening the knowledge and raising awareness of the public administration worker on the prevention of gender-based violence against women and children with disability. Madam President, while the COVID-19 pandemic caused many changes to our society in the enjoyment of the right and liberty, my delegation seized this opportunity to reaffirm Timor-Leste's steadfast commitment to the promotion and protection of all human rights. Not only is the UN at the core of the independence of Timor-Leste, but human rights are also a key element in our constitution, guiding the implementation of the country's foreign policy. In this respect, I wish to add the importance of having constructive and open dialogue, aiming at finding solutions for both respect the state's sovereignty and international human rights law. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. I give the floor to Georgia for a video statement.
Thank you, Madam President, and I also would like to thank the High Commissioner for the comprehensive report. We value HCHR's advice on the legislation on disabled persons. Georgia spares no effort to increase social benefits for persons with disabilities and continues harmonizing its domestic legislation in line with the relevant convention. We are grateful for the efforts of the High Commissioner for providing timely advice and evidence-based policy options on human rights-based responses to COVID-19. While recovering from the pandemic, we must not forget those who are under the dire humanitarian conditions in regions where international monitoring mechanisms have no access. In this context, let me reiterate that for the population of the Russian-occupied Georgian regions of Abkhazia and Tskhin Valley, the violation of the right to life, torture and ill treatment, kidnapping and arbitrary detention, restriction of freedom of movement, and blatant forms of ethnic discrimination have become part of everyday life. Russian Federation, which exercises effective control therein, as confirmed by the ECHR judgment, continues to prevent OHCHR and other relevant international human rights monitoring mechanisms from entering both regions. This once again clearly demonstrates the urgent need to access of the OHCHR and international and regional human rights mechanisms to the both occupied regions. Let me also remind the Council about the case of Georgian citizen Zaza Gacheladze, who was shot, wounded, illegally detained, and later illegally sentenced for more than 12 years by the Russian occupation forces. Herewith, we reiterate our call on the High Commissioner and the Council to demand his immediate release. Thank you.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Argentina for a video statement.
La Argentina agradece el informe de la alta comisionada y desea reiterar el apoyo a su trabajo y esfuerzos en todas las regiones del mundo que elevan los estándares de protección de los derechos humanos. En especial quisiéramos aprovechar esta oportunidad para manifestar, tal como lo hicimos en la OEA recientemente, nuestra preocupación por la situación de los derechos humanos en Nicaragua, en particular por las detenciones de figuras políticas de la oposición, medida cuya reconsideración solicitamos, así como por las continuas denuncias de graves violaciones de derechos humanos, la persistencia de las restricciones al espacio cívico y la represión de la disidencia, conforme lo dispuesto por la resolución 46/2 aprobada por este Consejo en marzo pasado con el voto favorable de mi país. Instamos al gobierno de Nicaragua que coopere plenamente con todos los mecanismos de este Consejo e implemente de manera integral las recomendaciones efectuadas por la alta comisionada en sus informes y que permita a su oficina acceder al país para cumplir con su mandato, que incluye el monitoreo de los derechos humanos en el contexto electoral y la asesoría técnica para garantizar el ejercicio de las libertades políticas, a fin de que la reforma electoral que Nicaragua ha emprendido pueda completarse y asegure la celebración de elecciones libres y transparentes siguiendo el cronograma establecido. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. I give the floor to the United Kingdom for a video statement.
Thank you, Madam President. High Commissioner, we share your concerns about the human rights implications of COVID-19 and reiterate that while some exceptional measures remain necessary to tackle the pandemic, these must not be used as a cover for repression. Let me address 4 specific country situations. In the Tigray region of Ethiopia, we are appalled by the targeting of civilians, extrajudicial killings, widespread sexual violence, and the conduct of hostilities which have directly contributed to famine conditions. We condemn the coup in Mali. It's vital that democratic, constitutional rule is restored within the agreed timeframe and the conditions set by ECOWAS are fulfilled. Recent actions by the Russian authorities mark a further deterioration in political freedoms and a mounting repression of civil society. And in Belarus, we unequivocally condemn Lukashenko's brutal campaign of repression against the human rights and fundamental freedoms of the Belarusian people. Finally, High Commissioner, we have repeatedly expressed our serious concerns about Xinjiang and hope you will keep the Council updated on whether you or your office have been granted unfettered access to the region. We also urge you to monitor closely Beijing's systematic undermining of rights and freedoms in Hong Kong. We will raise our strong concerns about Myanmar in the separate dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you. And I now give the floor to Ukraine for a video statement.
President, Madam High Commissioner, since this is my first intervention as the new permanent representative designate of Ukraine, I wish to thank the High Commissioner for her report and tireless work in enhancing international cooperation in the field of human rights, including in my country, Ukraine, where the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission has been working on the invitation of the government to monitor human rights situation with particular focus on Crimea and Donbass in the face of external aggression and occupation. We are grateful to the OHCHR for the technical assistance and its inputs to the updated National Human Rights Strategy recently adopted in Ukraine and the draft law on minorities. Regrettably, after 7 years of missions monitoring work, despite OHCHR recommendations contained in each of its 39 reports addressed to the Russian Federation and the international community, no progress has been made in enforcing the occupying power to comply with its obligations as a duty bearer under international humanitarian and human rights law. With a view to further strengthening human rights protection throughout the territory of Ukraine, we put forward a follow-up resolution, cooperation with and assistance to Ukraine in the field of human rights. We hope it will find broad support among delegations. We also look forward to the new High Commissioner's oral update on Ukraine during ID on July 9th and invite all delegations to take part in it. I thank you.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Turkey on Zoom.
Madam President, we left behind a historically difficult year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Turkey delivered medical supplies to 158 countries and 12 international organizations and urged member states to refrain from vaccine nationalism. Israel continues to act with absolute impunity in the occupied Palestinian territories. The international community has the responsibility to protect the Palestinians. Turkey welcomed the convening of the special session of the HRC in May and looks forward to the appointment of the members of the newly established International Independent Commission of Inquiry. We attach importance to the protection of the fundamental rights and freedoms of the Uyghur Turks and other Muslim minorities. We respect China's sovereignty and territorial integrity and discuss this issue at every level with the Chinese side. In this context, we call for more transparency on the situation in the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. We join the international call for a meaningful, full-fledged and unrestricted visit of Madam High Commissioner to the region. Xenophobia, racism, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and hate speech are on the rise. This year, we celebrate the 10th anniversary of the historic IHRC Resolution 1618. We believe that the Istanbul process is the best remedy to fight against those menaces. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. I give the floor to Afghanistan for a video statement.
President, my delegation thanks the High Commissioner for her report and reiterate Afghanistan's firm support to the OHCR and its crucial mandate to promote, protect, and fulfill human rights and fundamental freedoms. The time to move from a discourse of human rights to the practice of human rights has arrived. For the people of Afghanistan, the foundational right is the right to peace. Our people in the country subjected to 40 years of violence, the right that we yearn for most is the right to life, liberty, and the security of the person within a sovereign, democratic, and united country. We are facing a systematic onslaught against our society. Despite efforts challenge that impact progress and obstruct the full realization of human rights and peace, security, such as threats of terrorism, violent extremism, targeted killings, and other forms of violence against civilians, unfortunately remain unabated. Madam President, we believe that the preservation of human rights and civil liberties are inseparable elements of a durable peace in Afghanistan. For this reason, Madam High Commissioner, we reiterate our call to you to use your good offices to stress the necessity of preservation and protection of human rights values in the peace process. Finally, Madam President, we urge the OHCR to continue its efforts to integrate human rights into the United Nations work on peace building and sustaining peace. I thank you.
Thank you, and I give the floor to Cabo Verde in person.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, Madam High Commissioner, my delegation congratulates and thank you, Madam High Commissioner, for her comprehensive report. The protection and promotion of human rights are principles that are enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations and constitute one of the fundamental pillars of development. The situation of human rights violation that occurs in many latitudes and which has been exacerbated in the context of the COVID-19 is of great concern, and we encourage the High Commissioner and all UN member states to continue to cooperate to improve the situation of human rights in all countries, while emphasizing the importance of human rights in shaping the response to the pandemic. In its resolution, 44/2 Human Rights Council underscored the central role of emergency measures taken by states in response to the COVID-19 pandemic must in accordance with states' obligation under international human rights law. But this should be conducted in such a way as to reconcile the principle of respect of sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of states and non-interference in internal affairs of sovereign states, which are basic norms governing international relations. We commend the achievements China has made in its human rights cause and support China's implementation of one country, two systems in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. We maintain that all parties should abide by the purpose and principles of the Charter of the United Nations, and the principles of universality and impartiality. Finally, Madam President, we call open all states to uphold multilateralism, solidarity, and collaboration, and to promote and protect human rights through constructive dialogue and cooperation. I thank you, Madam President.
Thank you. And I give the floor to Ethiopia on Zoom.
Thank you, Madam President. Ethiopia thanks Madam High Commissioner and her office for the report. November 4 was like any random peaceful day in Ethiopia, where everyone was longing to move forward in marching towards fighting COVID-19, poverty alleviation, and other national reform agendas. However, simultaneous attack on the 200 military posts targeting the largest command in the Ethiopian National Defense Forces was carried out by the terrorist PLF. As the government is duty-bound to respond to such a reprehensive act, a law enforcement measure has been taken with a clear guideline on due diligence. It's unfortunate that there were collateral damage, and it is in this connection that the government will leave no stone unturned and is now availing the third phase of humanitarian assistance, where it has allocated huge resources comprising 70% of the total food and non-food items. The Federal Police and the Attorney General are conducting a credible investigation into alleged human rights and international humanitarian law violations during the law enforcement operation. So far, some suspects who have been found guilty and have already been convicted. Moreover, the government is facilitating the smooth functioning of the joint investigation by the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. It is our firm belief and universal principle that all corners, front and center, should respect the integrity of the process. Finally, Ethiopia is embracing a new democratic dispensation. The first ever democratic election was just conducted yesterday. We wish to highlight that although there are some challenges in Ethiopia's ongoing reform process, these, however, are not insurmountable. This is why we call upon the international community to support our efforts in a constructive manner. I thank you.
Yes, I'm sorry, but your time is up. Thank you very much. This was the last speaker that we could accommodate at this meeting. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as announced earlier, we will now watch a video message by His Excellency, Mr. Gideon Timotheus, Attorney General of Ethiopia. You have the floor.
Madam President, Madam High Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, a little over 2.5 years ago, I had the privilege to address this council when Ethiopia was reviewed at the 33rd UPR Working Group session. The UPR process has afforded Ethiopia the opportunity to showcase to the world the significant political and legislative reforms introduced by a new administration since 2018. At that time, many countries expressed their appreciation for our reform process. I would like to seize this opportunity to express the gratitude of the government of Ethiopia for the continued support of our friends in the international community. I would also like to report to this council that the reform has brought about progress on multiple fronts, including in the protection and promotion of human rights. However, just like any significant reform process in a complex environment, the reform efforts in Ethiopia have faced serious challenge. As we have continued pushing forward political and democratic reforms, we have encountered various challenges. One of these challenges was the desperate attempt by the TPLF, a terrorist group well known for gross human rights violations over the last 3 decades, to reclaim power through illegitimate, violent, and unconstitutional means. Since the reform began, the TPLF, unwilling to accept the new democratic dispensation in Ethiopia, has engaged in various unlawful activities, including acts of terrorism. While instigating deadly communal violence in different parts of the country, the TPLF has rebuffed the government's repeated plea to resolve differences in a peaceful manner. The efforts of civil society and religious leaders, including traditional elders, for peaceful dialogue were rejected time and again by the TPLF. Taking its reliance on violence to its logical extreme, the TPLF finally committed the most egregious crime by attacking the Ethiopian National Defense Force. This wanton act of aggression and treason posed a threat to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Ethiopian state. The belligerence of the TPLF also posed a grave danger to the stability of the entire Horn of Africa. Therefore, it was a duty incumbent upon the government of Ethiopia to take appropriate measures against the illegal army of the TPLF and to restore lawful authority in the Tigray region. 7 months after the successful conclusion of the law enforcement operation against the terrorist TPLF, the federal government has been working in collaboration with humanitarian actors to address the pressing needs of its citizens in the Tigray regional state. Unfettered humanitarian access has been granted to humanitarian workers, and rehabilitation and reconstruction efforts are underway, with progress being made in restoring basic social and economic services. The government of Ethiopia has also continued to engage with relevant humanitarian actors with a view to address any concerns they might have and difficulties they might face. Madam President, one of the objectives of the reforms being implemented by the government of Ethiopia is ensuring compliance with obligations and duties under international human rights and humanitarian law. Following reports of alleged crimes and human rights violations committed in the Tigray region during the past few months, the government of Ethiopia has committed itself to carrying out investigations to bring the perpetrators of such crimes to justice. This concrete commitment to ensuring accountability has been demonstrated by our actions. It has not just been a commitment of words, but of deeds. So far, charges have been pressed against more than 60 soldiers who have been suspected of killing civilians and engaging in acts of sexual violence. The investigations into atrocities committed by the TPLF militia in the town of Maikadra has been completed, and the trial of the suspects will commence in the coming weeks. Investigations into the crimes committed in the city of Aksum are also being finalized. As the facts on the ground warrant, these investigations are being expanded in their scope by coordinating the efforts of the military justice system, regional law enforcement authorities, and federal investigators and prosecutors. In addition to these efforts, a joint investigation team composed of the Ethiopian Human Rights Commission and the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has already been deployed on the ground and has commenced its work. This, Madam President, are testament to the willingness and the capability of the Ethiopian government to ensure accountability. Those who are involved in committing crimes will be brought to justice and will be punished to the full extent of the law. For these mechanisms of accountability to function properly, it is imperative for the international community to wait for the findings of the investigations, which will be made public in due course. The Council needs to let justice run its course. Premature and untimely resolutions in the Council session will constitute undue interference with ongoing investigations. Interventions by the Council at this point in time serve no legitimate purpose, while the investigations, including the joint investigation with the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, are proceeding smoothly. Such premature actions would only undermine the integrity of ongoing investigations and do nothing to advance the cause of human rights. To the contrary, such efforts amount to politically motivated interference in ongoing investigations. Ethiopia, in this regard, calls on the Council to support its effort, particularly by providing the requisite time and space for the investigations to be completed. Finally, I would like to assure this August gathering and the international community of Ethiopia's commitment to continue its constructive engagement in the work of the Council and to fulfill its obligations under international law to respect, protect, and fulfill human rights. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency for this statement. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this brings us to the end of this meeting. We will reconvene at 3 p.m. to continue the interactive dialogue on the annual report of the High Commissioner, followed by the presentation of one report and an oral update under Agenda Item 2, and the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on Adequate Housing. I hereby close the third meeting of the 47th session of the Human Rights Council.